Welcome, dear listener. Welcome to this quiet hour that you have set aside at the close of your long day for nothing more demanding than rest. Settle yourself now into whatever soft place has been waiting for you, and let the weight of the day begin to loosen from your shoulders, slowly, gently, as though it were a heavy traveling cloak that you no longer have any reason to carry. Let your eyes grow tired, and let them close if they wish to close, for there is nothing here that you must watch, and nothing here that you must do. Draw one slow breath in, all the way down to the bottom of your lungs, and then let it go again, unhurried, like a tide that has all the time in the world, and no shore it is in any rush to reach, and then another, slower still. Tonight we will wander together into something very old and very gentle, into the long and half-remembered tale of a wise and wandering wizard called Gandalf, a tale that is woven through whole ages of a world that never was, and yet somehow always feels as though it must have been, and you need do nothing at all but listen and breathe, and let the soft current of the story carry you down, easy and slow, into the warm and shoreless country of sleep. Have you ever wondered, in some idle and dreaming moment between waking and sleeping, where the truly old souls of a story come from? Have you ever wondered who it was that lit the first small lamp against the great dark, or who walked the dusty roads of the world, unrecognized and unremarked, carrying within him far more wisdom than his plain grey garments would ever have led a passing traveller to suspect? Have you wondered what it might be to be older than the mountains, older than the seas, older indeed than the very light of the stars, and yet to take such a tender and patient interest in small and ordinary and short-lived things? These are the soft questions that will drift through the tale we share tonight, and there is no need whatsoever to answer any of them, no need to hold any single thought too tightly in your mind, for they are placed here only to set your thinking gently adrift, the way a little boat is set loose from its mooring and allowed to turn slowly upon still water. And before we sink down fully into the heart of the story, let me offer you one small and cozy invitation, just this once, and never again, so that it troubles your rest not at all. If it should bring you any quiet comfort to do so, you might leave behind a few soft words, somewhere down below, telling all of us where in this wide, turning world you happen to be listening from, and what the hour is in your own particular corner of the night, so that everyone who gathers here in the dark with you might feel, just for a moment, the gentle and far-flung company of one another, scattered across the rivers and the cities and the sleeping fields of the whole round earth, and yet somehow drawn together into this one hushed and shared and peaceful hour of rest. There now, that is all that I will ask of you. Let it be a small warmth, like a single candle in a far window, and nothing more than that. And now, to truly understand this wandering wizard, to come to know him not merely as the grey-cloaked traveller with the long staff and the broad, drooping hat, but as the deep and ancient spirit that he truly was beneath all those humble seemings, we must drift back, far back, much further back than the years of crowned kings and the toppling of proud towers, back beyond the slow rising and the slower falling of the mountains themselves, all the way back to the very beginning of all things, to a time before the world was even shaped, when there was as yet no earth to walk upon, no sky to wander beneath, and no stars at all to mark the long passage of the night. In that beginning, before beginnings, there was only the one, called in the old tongue Ilúvatar, the maker of all that is, and around him, in the timeless quiet, there were the holy spirits that he had brought into being out of his own thought, the very first and eldest of all created things, kindled like sparks, struck from a deep and inward fire. And to these spirits, in the great hush before the world, the one gave a theme of music, a single thread of melody, and he bade them take it up and make it grow and adorn it, each according to his own understanding, until what had begun as one quiet voice swelled and deepened and rose into a vast and overflowing harmony, a music so great and so beautiful that there has never since been heard its equal, and perhaps there never shall be. Picture it, if you like, only softly, only as a feeling rather than a sound your ears could ever truly hold, a slow and gathering chord building in a darkness that is not frightening but warm, voice answering voice, theme winding into theme, until the whole of the formless dark trembles and shines with the sheer weight of the song. Let that imagined music settle over you now, like a thick and gentle blanket, and let it be enough simply to feel its warmth without straining to hear it. Out of that great music the world was made. The themes that the spirits had sung became in time the seas and the lands, the high places and the deep places, the wheeling of the lights above and the slow turning of the seasons below. And those of the holy spirits who most loved the vision that they had helped to sing chose to descend into the new-made world, to dwell within it, and to tend it through all the long ages of its growing. The greatest among these were called the Vala, the powers of the world, and they were as lords and queens of the earth, 14 of them counted in love and reverence, mighty beyond the imagining of any who came after, each one given the keeping of some great part of the world. One for the airs and the high winds, one for the deeps of the sea, one for the growing things and the orchards and the grain, one for the smithwork and the bones of the mountains, and others besides, each shaping and guarding the portion that was dearest to their hearts. But there was one among that first and mightiest order, whose pride had curdled into envy, and whose envy had darkened into malice, and he turned away from the music, and sought to bend the whole of the world to his own will. And so in time, he was no longer numbered among the lords of the earth at all, but became the first shadow, the first sorrow, the deep root from which so much later grief would slowly grow. We need not dwell upon him tonight, for ours is a gentler tale, and we will let his name fall quietly away into the dark where it belongs. Beneath the lords and queens of the world, there was another order of spirits, less in might but far greater in number, who had likewise come down into the world to serve and to learn and to labor at the side of the great ones. These were called the Maiar, and it is here at last, among this wide and gentle company, that the wizard of our tale first enters the long story of the world, though not yet under the name by which you and I have come to know and to love him. In those first ages he bore another name entirely, an older and a softer name, and he was called Olórin, and he was, by the quiet account of those who knew such things, the wisest of all the Maiar, though he wore his wisdom lightly and never once thought to make a show of it, for that was simply not in his nature, neither then in the beginning nor in any of the long ages that came after. Now Olórin did not labor in the forging of mountains, nor in the raising of storms, nor in any of the loud and visible works by which the great powers shaped the bones of the world. His was a quieter calling. In those early days he dwelt for a long while in the gardens of one of the Vala, a lord of dreams and of visions and of gentle rest, a being whose halls were places of soft fountains and of deep, untroubled sleep, where the weary spirits of the world might come and lay down their cares and be healed. And it is a pleasing thought, is it not? And a fitting one, that the wizard who would one day bring rest and counsel and quiet hope to so many troubled hearts should himself have learned his earliest lessons in the very gardens of sleep, among the falling fountains and the long, untroubled silences, where dreaming was not an escape from the world but a kind of healing of it. Hold that image gently in your mind, as your own breathing slows, a still garden under a soft and changeless light, the murmur of water that never ceases and never hurries, and somewhere among the quiet pools, a spirit walking slowly, in no haste at all, learning the patient art of comfort. Yet more than the gardens of dreams, Olórin loved to walk in the house of another of the great powers, one whom the old tales call the Lady of Pity and of Mourning. She was a strange and beautiful figure, this lady, for her grief was not the grief of despair, but the grief that heals, the kind of sorrow that, when it is born in love, makes the heart wider and softer rather than harder and smaller. She wept, the old accounts say, for all the hurts of the world, for every wound and every wrong, and yet her weeping was never barren, for out of it came pity, and out of pity came patience, and out of patience came that long, slow, enduring hope that does not break even when all the louder and brighter hopes have failed. And it was from her, more than from any other, that Olórin learned the deepest lessons of his long life, how to take pity upon the small and the sorrowful and the overlooked, and how to wait and wait and wait again through the slow grinding of the ages, without ever once letting go of hope. These were the gifts he carried out of the timeless years and into the world of changing days, the pity and the patience that would, far in the future, make all the difference in the fate of the whole world, though no one in those early days could possibly have guessed it, and least of all Olórin himself. He served in those long ages beneath the king of the powers of the world, the lord of the high airs, and the keeper of the holy mountain, a being of clear sight and great and steady wisdom, and beneath the king's queen also, the most beloved and most revered of all the ladies of the world, she who had set the stars in their courses and kindled them in the deeps of the sky for the long-awaited waking of the first peoples. And so Olórin moved among the very greatest of the powers, learning of vision from the Lord of Dreams, learning of pity from the Lady of Morning, learning of wisdom and of clear governance from the King and Queen of the world, gathering into himself quietly and without notice every gentle virtue that he would one day need so badly and would one day spend so freely. Yet for all that he walked among the mighty, his heart inclined always toward the small and the unfinished, toward the new and tender peoples who were destined to wake in the world when its first long morning came, and it was toward them, more than toward any throne or any high seat of power, that his deepest love would forever turn. For when at last the first of the speaking peoples awoke in the world, beneath the new-kindled stars, by the shores of a quiet water far away in the east of the lands, it was said that Olórin loved them dearly from the very first, and that he often walked among them, though they never knew it was he, for he came to them unseen or wore some passing fair seeming, and gave them, secretly and without ever asking for thanks or credit, the gift of beautiful visions and the soft, half-heard whisper of good counsel in their hearts. They did not know from whom these things came. They only knew that, now and again, in some dark and frightened hour, a sudden quiet courage would rise in them unbidden, or a despairing soul would wake from its black mood as though touched by an unseen and gentle hand, and the shadows of fear and imagined dread would scatter, and the heart would lift, and no one could ever say quite why. That was Olórin's way, even then, in the first ages of the world, to give without being seen, to comfort without being thanked, to kindle hope in the dark, and then to slip quietly away before any could turn and learn the name of their benefactor. And is that not a beautiful thing to carry with you down towards sleep, the thought of a wise and gentle spirit moving unseen through a frightened world, asking nothing, taking nothing, leaving behind him only courage and consolation and the soft return of hope? And so the long bright ages of the world wore slowly on, age upon age, in lands of which we know now only the dimmest and most golden fragments. And in all that time Olórin went quietly about his patient work of comfort, and the tales of him fall silent, for the chroniclers of those days had eyes mostly for the great deeds of the great ones, the wars and the buildings and the makings and the unmakings, and they did not always think to record the quiet movements of a humble spirit who wished above all things not to be noticed. Let the tale fall silent with them for a little while, then hear in the deep and golden hush of the world's morning, and let your own thoughts drift in that silence as a leaf drifts upon still water, turning slowly, going nowhere, perfectly at peace. And then, when the tale takes him up again, the world had grown very old and very weary, and far darker than it had been in the golden morning of its making. Long had Olórin dwelt across the western sea, in the blessed and undying land where the powers of the world had withdrawn after the breaking of so many griefs, and from that far shore he had watched, across the vast and sundering water, the slow turning of the fortunes of the mortal lands. He had seen the great kingdoms of old rise up in splendor, and then crumble away again into ruin and into legend. He had seen the proud island realm of men, mightiest of all the works of mortal hands, lifted high in glory, and then drowned beneath the hungry sea in a single terrible day, for the pride and the folly of its later kings. He had seen the long defeat of the fair folk, the slow fading of their light from the world. And through all those grieving ages he had carried still, unspent, the pity and the patience that he had learned so long before in the gardens of dreams and the house of mourning, and his heart still turned, as it had always turned, toward the small and short-lived peoples who labored on in the gathering dark, never knowing how dearly they were loved. For the old shadow had not died. The first Dark Lord, the one whose name we have let fall away, had at last been overthrown and cast out beyond the circles of the world, but his greatest servant remained, a spirit who had once been fair and was now wholly given over to the will to dominate and to possess. This second shadow was patient, as his master had never been patient, and cunning and slow and terribly enduring, and he had wrought in secret, in a far and earlier age, a single ring of gold, into which he had poured a great and grievous part of his own native power, that he might rule the wills of others through it and bind the whole of the world beneath his hand. And though that ring had been struck from his hand long ago in a great battle at the end of an earlier age, and though he himself had been overthrown and his shape destroyed, yet he was not unmade, for so long as the ring endured somewhere in the world, he could not wholly die, and slowly, like a sickness creeping back into a body that had thought itself healed, his spirit gathered itself once more in the wild and shadowed places of the East, and began again, with infinite patience, to grow. Now this was the great peril that hung over the third great age of that world, the long age of the slow return of the shadow, and the powers across the western sea did not fail to perceive it, for their sight was long and their wisdom was deep, and they took counsel together in their high halls upon what should be done. And here is a thing worth dwelling upon a little, here in the quiet, for it tells you much about the gentleness that lay at the very heart of the world. The powers did not choose to answer the rising darkness with darkness of their own. They did not gather an army of the mighty and hurl it against the east to break the shadow by main force, as once, in an earlier and more terrible age, the breaking of such a force had nearly broken the world itself along with it. They had learned through long and bitter sorrow that evil cannot truly be undone by overwhelming power, for power calls to power, and the wielding of it, however good the cause, scars and hardens the wielder, and leaves new wounds in the world that take whole ages to heal. And so they chose another and a humbler way. They chose not to send warriors, but to send help of a quieter kind. They chose to send wisdom and counsel and patient encouragement, clothed in forms that would not overawe the peoples of the world, but would walk among them as friends and advisers, kindling courage in others rather than commanding it, so that the free peoples of the lands might be moved to stand against the shadow of their own will and by their own strength, and not be merely herded into safety like frightened sheep by powers too great for them to comprehend. Is that not a beautiful and a gentle wisdom, to choose to help in such a way that those you help are made stronger and freer rather than smaller? Let that thought rest softly with you for a moment, like a warm hand laid upon a tired brow. And so it was decided that a small company of the Maiar, the gentler spirits of the world, should be chosen and sent across the sea into the mortal lands to oppose the rising shadow not with force but with counsel. And these chosen messengers came in time to be called by the peoples of the world the wise ones, or in the old tongue, the Istari, which is to say the wizards. There were to be 5 of them in all, 5 quiet emissaries cloaked against the dark. And it was no light thing that was asked of them, for they were to be sent, by the deep and careful design of the powers, not in the full glory and might of their true spiritual natures, which no mortal eye could have borne to look upon, but housed instead within bodies of flesh, the bodies of old men, so that they might feel weariness, and hunger, and cold, and fear, and grief, and all the long aches of a body that grows old, and so might come to understand, from the inside, and not merely from above, the burdens borne by those they were sent to aid. They were to walk on foot the long roads of the world. They were to lean upon staves and feel the wind cut through them. They were to learn patience not as a virtue admired from afar, but as a thing endured day by weary day. And they were forbidden, by the terms of their sending, to match the shadow power for power, or to seek to master the peoples of the world through fear or force or domination, for to do so would have been to fall into the very evil they had been sent to oppose. Theirs was to be the long, slow, often thankless labor of encouragement, of counsel quietly given and as often as not ignored, of hope kindled patiently in 1,000 small hearts against the gathering night. When the powers came to choose who should go upon this errand, there was, the old tale tells us, some hesitation, as well there might be, for it was a great peril and a great hardship that was being asked. 2 of the Maiar came forward and offered themselves willingly. One was a spirit of fire and of craft and of great seeming wisdom, who would in the mortal lands take the name we know as the White Wizard, the chief and the first named of the order. Another was a spirit of long and venturesome roads, who would pass away into the far east of the world, and is little spoken of in the tales that have come down to us. But the king of the powers, when the choosing was made, desired that a third should go also, and the one he named was Olórin. And here, dear listener, is one of the most quietly moving moments in the whole long tale of the Grey Wizard, a moment so small and so human that you might pass over it without noticing how much it holds. For when Olórin was named to go, he did not leap forward eagerly, nor did he take up the errand with any pride or any sense of his own fitness for it. Instead, he hesitated. He held back. He said in his quiet way that he feared the shadow he was being asked to go and face, and that he felt himself too weak, too small, too unequal to so great a task, and that he was not the one who ought to be sent. And what did the king of the powers make of this reluctance, this confession of fear and weakness? Did he reproach Olórin for it? Did he set him aside as unfit and choose some bolder and more eager spirit in his place? He did not. For the king's wisdom was very deep, and he perceived a truth that the world has always been slow to learn, that the one who knows his own weakness and fears the darkness and feels himself too small for the burden laid upon him, and yet is willing nonetheless to take it up, is very often the one most fit to bear it, far more fit than the one who is confident and unafraid, for the confident and the unafraid are precisely the ones most likely, in the end, to be tempted by the very power they were sent to fight. And so the king answered that this very fear and humility was all the more reason why Olórin should go, and that he should go for the love that still burned within him for the fair folk of the world. And Olórin, bowing to that gentle command, accepted the errand he had feared, and set his face at last toward the mortal lands and the long, long labor that awaited him there. Imagine yourself just for a moment, as you lie there warm and safe in the dark, standing upon a far grey shore at the very edge of the western sea, beneath a sky of soft and fading stars, watching a small grey ship slip away from the land and out onto the wide and waiting water. There is no fear in this watching, only a deep and tender quiet, for you know, as the ship grows small upon the swell, that the one who sails upon it carries with him an errand of mercy, and that though he goes in fear and feels himself too weak, he goes, nonetheless, for love. Let the ship grow small, let the shore grow still. Let the soft stars wheel slowly overhead, and let your own breathing fall in with the long, slow breathing of the sea, in and in again, as the grey traveller passes out of the blessed land and toward the troubled shores of the world. The grey ship came at last to the mortal lands, after how long a crossing of the wide water no tale records, and it made its quiet landfall upon a sheltered firth in the northwest of those lands, at the place that the fair folk called the Grey Havens, a haven of long stone quays and tall masts, and the eternal soft crying of gulls, where the ships of the elder kindred lay at their moorings beneath the mist, and where the road that led down out of the world and away over the sea had its beginning and its end. And there to meet the newcomer stood the keeper of that haven, an ancient and noble lord of the fair folk, a shipwright of unimaginable age and skill, the eldest of all his kindred remaining in those lands, a being of deep sight and quiet foreknowledge who had stood upon that shore through the rising and the falling of more ages than most could even number. And as Olórin came up out of the grey ship in the seeming of a bent and weary old man, leaning already upon his staff, plain and unremarkable to any eye that did not look very closely, the old shipwright looked very closely indeed, for his sight was not as the sight of others, and in that humble and travel-worn figure he perceived at once the great and ancient spirit that lay hidden within, and he understood, in the way that the truly wise sometimes understand things before they are told, that here was one upon whom much would in the end depend. Now this old shipwright held in his keeping a thing of great and secret power, one of 3 rings that the fair folk had wrought long before, in a happier and more hopeful age, before the shadow had taught them the bitter cost of such makings. These 3 rings were not as the other rings of power, for they had never been touched by the hand of the shadow, and they were free of his taint and unsullied by any will to dominate. And their virtue was not to compel or to enslave, but to preserve, to heal, to ward off the weariness of the world, and to kindle and to keep alight the small fires of hope and of making and of joy against the slow erosion of the years. And the ring that the old shipwright kept was the ring of fire, the reddest and the most kindling of the 3, a ring whose power was to rekindle hearts grown cold and to set hope burning again where hope had guttered low. And the old lord, perceiving the true nature of the grey traveller before him, and perceiving too it may be some small foreshadowing of the long and weary errand that lay ahead, took that ring of fire from his own keeping, and gave it freely into the keeping of Olórin, saying, in the gentle and ceremonious way of the elder kindred, that with this ring the newcomer might rekindle hearts in a world that was growing cold, and that his labours and his burdens would be very great, but that this small fire might lighten them, and lend a little warmth to the long road ahead. And the grey traveller took the ring of fire, and kept it ever after hidden upon his hand, and never once made a show of it, nor used it to overawe or to command, but bore it quietly through all the long ages of his labor as a secret source of inner warmth, so that those who came near him in their dark and frightened hours, though they could not have said why, felt their courage stir and their hope rekindle, and went away comforted, never knowing the source of the small fire that had passed into their cold hearts. There is something very fitting in that, is there not? That the wizard who had learned his earliest lessons in the gardens of dreams and the house of mourning should be given, for his long errand of comfort, a ring whose only power was to kindle hope, and that he should carry it not as a weapon but as a hearth, a small hidden hearth that he carried within himself through all the cold and shadowed lands, sharing its warmth freely and asking nothing in return. And there was another upon that misty shore, in those early days of the wizard's coming, of whom the old tales speak, a lord of the fair folk of surpassing brightness and might, one who had himself, in a far and tragic age of the world, fallen in battle against a great demon of fire and shadow, in the ruin of a doomed and beautiful city, and who had afterward been granted, by the grace of the powers, to return again into life, and to be sent back into the mortal lands upon an errand not unlike that of the wizards themselves. This bright lord was among the mightiest of all his kindred who still walked the world, and yet, like the grey traveller, he too went humbly about his work, and the two of them, the returned warrior and the disguised spirit of comfort, were of one mind in the deep matter of how the shadow should and should not be fought. We may leave these meetings now upon the misty shore, the grey traveller and the old shipwright and the bright returned lord, and let them recede into the soft and folding mist, for the long errand has begun, and the road, as it always does, calls the wanderer onward. For onward the grey traveller went, out of the misty haven and into the wide and weathered lands. And now we come to the part of his long tale that is in some ways the most gentle of all, the long, slow, unhurried centuries of his wandering, before ever the great peril broke fully upon the world. For unlike his fellow wizards, who in time settled each into some fixed and chosen place, and put down roots and gathered about themselves the trappings of a settled life, the grey traveller made for himself no home at all in all the wide lands. He built no tower, he claimed no realm. He gathered to himself no wealth, and no followers, and no honours, but went on, ever wandering, ever moving, from one end of the western lands to the other, and back again, a tireless pilgrim upon the endless roads. And so the fair folk gave him a name that meant the grey pilgrim, for he dwelt nowhere, and was at home everywhere, and he was forever passing through. Picture him now, that grey wanderer, as he was in those long and quiet centuries, an old man to all seeming, grey of cloak and grey of hat and grey of beard, leaning upon a long worn staff, his boots gone soft and shapeless with the miles, walking always on foot across the rolling green country, over the long brown hills and through the deep woods, and along the singing rivers, in fair weather and in foul, in the green flush of spring and the gold of harvest and the iron grip of winter, asking for shelter at the doors of the poor as readily as at the gates of the great, and welcomed almost everywhere, for he brought with him good talk and old songs and wonderful tales, and a strange comfort that lingered after he had gone. He was warm and quick and eager in his heart, though he hid it often beneath a gruff and weathered seeming, and only those who knew him truly and looked closely ever glimpsed the bright, ageless fire that burned beneath the ash-grey garments of the old man. He was merry and kind, and especially gentle with the young and the simple and the small, with children and with the humble folk who counted for nothing in the eyes of the great. And yet he could be sharp of tongue too, and swift to rebuke folly, and impatient with pride and with self-importance wherever he found it. He sought no power for himself, and no praise, and no thanks, and would not have any hold him in awe, nor take his counsel out of fear, but only out of love and out of the free choosing of their own hearts. And because he was forever wandering, and because he passed through so many lands and was seen by so many different peoples, he came to be known by many different names, as a much-travelled and much-loved figure so often is. The fair folk of the high kindred called him by one name, which meant the grey pilgrim. The fair folk of another kindred had their own name for him. The stout and secretive delvers of the deep mountains, the dwarf folk, had yet another. In the warm lands of the south he was called by a name in a tongue all of its own. The horse lords of the green plains, when in later days they saw him riding upon a great grey horse, swifter than the wind, called him the grey mantle, and would in the end name him also the white rider. And among the plain hardy men of the north, who saw him work small wonders now and again, lights and lovely fires, and other harmless marvels for the delight of children, there grew up the belief that he must be one of the fair folk himself, some elf of the wand, and they gave him a name in their own rough tongue that has come down to us, very nearly, as the name by which you and I now know and love him best, Gandalf. And so we may at last begin to call him by that dear and familiar name, here in the warm dark, knowing now all the long ages and all the gentle labours that lay hidden behind it, knowing that the grey old wanderer with the worn staff and the broad hat was in truth one of the eldest and the wisest spirits in all the world, who had chosen for love to walk the muddy roads on aching feet and to be taken for nothing more than a travelling conjurer of fireworks. Is there not something very lovely in that humility, something worth holding on to as you drift, that the truly great so often choose to go small and unremarked among us, and that the kindly old stranger at the door may be carrying within him more than any of us could ever guess? And those small wonders that he wrought, the lights and the lovely fires, the bright wheeling stars of flame that he would loose into the dark sky on festival nights, the showers of silver and gold sparks, the soft thunders and the trailing comets of coloured fire, he made them not for any great purpose, and not to impress or to overawe, but only for mirth and for delight, and most of all for the simple joy of children, who would gaze up at his fireworks open-mouthed in wonder, and remember them all their lives. For he desired above all things that none should fear him, and that none should take his counsel out of dread, but that he should be loved, and that the good he did should be done freely and received freely, and that the small and the simple should have their share of beauty and of wonder no less than the great. Hold that picture gently as you sink a little deeper now. A warm summer evening long ago, the sky just darkening into deep blue, a crowd of small folk gathered upon a green hill, and the old grey wizard among them, sending up into the gathering night a great soft burst of silver fire that hangs and shimmers and slowly falls, while all the upturned faces shine with delight, and somewhere a child laughs aloud for the sheer joy of it. Let that gentle light be the last thing in your mind for this little while, the soft falling silver fire and the laughing child, and let it carry you down a little further towards sleep. Yet even in those long centuries of quiet wandering, the grey pilgrim's deep heart was never wholly at ease, for the wise among the free peoples had begun, here and there, to feel a cold and creeping unease, a sense that something was stirring in the world that ought to have stayed dead. After Gandalf had walked the western lands for 100 years and more, growing dear to so many and learning the lay of every road and the ways of every people, he and the other wise ones became aware that a shadow had begun to gather and to grow in the heart of a great forest in the north, a vast and ancient woodland that had once been called the Greenwood, the Great Greenwood, a place of dappled light and birdsong and tall sun-warmed trees. But now a darkness was creeping into it, slow and cold and patient, a sickness that crept along the roots and dimmed the light beneath the leaves, until the very name of the forest changed in the mouths of those who feared it, and it came to be called the Mirkwood, the dark and tangled wood, where the trees grew close and the paths grew faint, and a traveller might lose his way and his courage together beneath the heavy, listening dark. The heart of that growing shadow, the wise ones found, lay in a grim hill fortress in the south of the great forest, a place of broken stone and bad air and watching eyes, a high, dark hold from which the chill seemed to spread out through all the wood. Some among the wise, when they spoke of this shadow in low voices, supposed it to be no more than one of the dread wraith-servants of the old enemy, returned to trouble the world, terrible enough in its way, but not the very worst that might be feared. But Gandalf, in the quiet of his own deep heart, feared something far darker and far worse. He feared that the shadow growing in that grim hold might be no mere servant at all, but the old enemy himself, the great shadow of the world, slowly and secretly gathering himself back into strength after his long defeat, and biding his time in that hidden fastness until he should be strong enough to come forth again into the open and claim the world. It was only a fear in those days, only a cold suspicion that he could not yet prove, and so for a long while nothing was done, and the shadow in the forest was watched and feared and let alone, and slowly, year by patient year, it grew. And while it grew, in the south of the forest, other dark things stirred and multiplied across the wide lands, as they always do when the great shadow gathers. Foul creatures bred and swarmed in the dark places under the mountains, and the high passes grew perilous, and old strongholds of the free peoples fell silent and were lost, swallowed one by one into the spreading dimness. A dread captain of the wraith servants raised up a grim realm of his own in a cold northern land, and made war upon the scattered remnant of an ancient kingdom of men, breaking it and driving its people into exile and wandering. The shadow was patient, and the shadow was wide, and it did not strike all at once, but spread instead like a slow stain across the map of the world. Here a fallen tower, there a darkened wood, here a swarming of foul things in the deep places, and everywhere a creeping cold. And still for a long while the wise did little but watch, and hope, and wait, for the proof was not yet certain, and the shadow had not yet shown its face. At last, after long delay, the grey wizard resolved that the doubt must be ended, and he went himself, alone and in some peril, into the grim hold in the south of the great forest, to look upon the shadow there with his own eyes, and to learn its nature. And at his coming the shadow fled, withdrawing from the hold and vanishing away into the east, so that Gandalf could not lay hold of it, nor force it to reveal its true name. He had seen it only as a nameless dread, a dark and watchful malice, and he came away knowing that something terrible indeed lurked there, but not yet certain whether it was the old enemy himself, or only one of his great servants. And with the shadow fled away into the east, there fell upon the world a long and uneasy lull, a stretch of years that the wise afterward called the watchful peace, a peace not of true safety, but only of held breath, for the shadow had merely withdrawn to gather more strength in secret, too wary as yet to challenge the watching wisdom of the West openly, and in the quiet of that withdrawal he worked instead to corrupt and to win over the wild and scattered peoples of the far east and the far south, that he might come back in the end far stronger than before. So even the peace of those years was a kind of shadow, a lull bought at a hidden price. And Gandalf, who saw deeper than most, was never wholly easy in it, for he knew that the held breath could not be held forever. And so it proved, for the long lull ended at last, and the shadow returned to the grim hold in the great forest, more powerful now than it had been before, having spent its years of withdrawal in the slow corruption of distant peoples and the patient gathering of strength. And it was clear to the wise now that mere watching and waiting would no longer serve, and that the free peoples of the West, who had so long stood scattered and divided, each minding its own borders, must take counsel together if they were to stand against the rising dark. And so there was formed a high council of the wisest and the mightiest of the free peoples, a fellowship of the wise gathered to oppose the shadow and to take counsel together upon all the perils of the age. Among its members were the grey wizard himself, and the white wizard who was chief of the order, and a lady of the fair folk of surpassing wisdom and foresight, who dwelt in a hidden golden wood, and bore one of the 3 unsullied rings, and a lord of the fair folk who kept a fair and ancient refuge in a hidden valley among the eastern mountains, and who bore another of the 3, and the old shipwright of the misty haven, who bore the 3rd, the ring of fire, until he had given it long before into Gandalf's keeping, and other lords and wise ones, besides whose names the tales do not all preserve. Now, when the council was formed, there arose the question of who should lead it, and the lady of the golden wood, who saw more deeply than most, wished that the grey wizard should be its head, for she perceived with her long sight something of the depth and the steadfastness that lay beneath his humble seeming. But Gandalf would not take the leadership, and he declined it gently but firmly, for he had not come into the world to sit at the head of councils, nor to bind himself to any seat of authority, but to wander, free and unattached, going where his own deep judgment led him, helping where help was needed, and then passing on, and he would not give up that freedom even for so great an honor. And so the leadership of the council passed instead to the White Wizard, the chief of the order, who was learned beyond all others in the lore of the Rings of Power, and who seemed in those days the very fittest to guide the wise against the shadow. And there were those who marked, even then, a small shadow of displeasure cross the White Wizard's face, at the lady's first wish that the grey one should lead, a small seed of jealousy planted in that proud and learned heart, though it was little noticed at the time, and would not bear its bitter fruit for many a long year yet. But we will let that small seed lie quiet in the dark for now, as you yourself lie quiet in the warm dark, and we will speak of gentler things. For with little settled at that first gathering of the wise beyond the mere fact of their joining, the grey wizard took up his staff again and resumed his endless wandering, and in those years his roads led him, as they often did, into a small and green and quiet country in the northwest of the lands, a soft land of low rolling hills and tilled fields and winding lanes, of round green doors set into grassy banks and tall hedgerows and slow brown rivers, a comfortable, well-loved, well-tended little country far from the great affairs of the world. And in that green country there dwelt a small and modest people, a folk of no great stature and no great ambition, fond of good food and good drink and good cheer, and the warm comforts of home, peaceable and unwarlike, and little regarded by the great peoples of the wider world who scarcely knew that they existed at all. These were the hobbits, the little folk of the green country, and Gandalf in his wanderings came among them and took to them at once, as he had always taken to the small and the humble and the overlooked, and he befriended them and grew fond of their homely ways and their good plain sense, and their unexpected toughness, and they in their turn grew fond, in a wary and bemused sort of way, of the strange old wandering wizard who came among them now and again with his wonderful fireworks and his odd tales. And it proved a fortunate friendship, that friendship between the great old spirit and the small green folk, more fortunate by far than any could then have guessed, for in a hard and bitter season, a long and cruel winter that gripped the land in iron and brought hunger and want and the howling of wolves out of the white, the grey wizard came to the little folk in their need and helped them through it. And in that hard season he saw, for the first time, and with his own eyes, something in that small, unwarlike people that astonished him, a deep and stubborn courage, a quiet endurance, an unbreakable willingness to go on and to make the best of things and to look after one another even in the teeth of despair, a strength that had nothing to do with might or size or grandeur and everything to do with heart, and he never forgot it. He filed it away quietly in the deep places of his thought, this surprising strength of the small folk, this unlooked-for courage in a people the whole world overlooked, and the day would come, far off and unguessed, when that small and stubborn courage would tip the balance of the whole world, and Gandalf, who had glimpsed it first in the depths of a hard winter, would be the one wise enough to set his hope upon it. But that is a tale for further on. For now, let it be enough, as you drift, to hold the warm thought of a small, brave people enduring a hard winter together, lighting their lamps against the dark, sharing what little they had, and looking after one another, while outside the snow fell soft and endless upon the silent hills. Now in those same years, while the grey wizard came and went among the little folk and learned to love their quiet country, his thoughts and his roads were also drawn northward and eastward by another and a graver matter, for a king of the deep-delving dwarf folk had gone missing out of the world. This king had once ruled a great and proud people who had dwelt long ago beneath a lonely mountain that rose alone out of the eastern lands, a mountain hollowed into vast halls of stone and heaped with treasure unimaginable, until a great winged worm of fire, a dragon out of the cold north, had come down upon them in flame and ruin, and driven the dwarf folk out, and taken their mountain and their hoard for its own. And the king of that exiled people, wandering homeless and grieving through the long years of his people's loss, had at last set out with a few companions on some dark and desperate errand, camping beneath the eaves of the dark and tangled forest. And there he had vanished away and was seen no more. He had been taken, though none then knew it, into the grim hold of the shadow in the south of the forest, and there in the deep pits beneath that dread hall he was held and tormented, for he bore upon his hand the last of 7 rings of power that had long ago been given to the lords of the dwarf folk, and the shadow desired that ring above all things. The grey wizard sought a long while for that vanished king, in his comings and goings about the lands, but for many years he could find no trace of him at all, for he was hidden deep where no friendly eye could reach. And it was in the course of these searchings and wanderings, the old tales tell us, that Gandalf came once upon a perilous and lonely road that would prove, far in the future, of great and unlooked-for importance. For he passed in those years through a vast and ancient underground realm, a mighty kingdom of the dwarf folk delved long ago into the very roots of a great range of snow-capped mountains, a labyrinth of pillared halls and endless stairs and deep black chasms and roads of stone running for leagues beneath the weight of the peaks above. Once it had been the greatest and the most glorious of all the works of the dwarf folk, full of light and the ringing of hammers and the glint of treasure. But in an age before it had been delved too deep and too greedily, and the delvers had woken something in the dark beneath the world, a nameless terror out of the deep places, an ancient demon of fire and of shadow, and before that terror the dwarf folk had fled, and the great kingdom had fallen silent and become a place of dread that no living thing willingly entered. Through this dark and abandoned realm the grey wizard passed in his searchings, entering by one gate far in the east, and coming out at last, after long and lonely wandering in the dark, through the western doors upon the far side of the mountains. And he kept the memory of that perilous passage stored away, never guessing how dearly that knowledge of the dark roads beneath the mountains would one day be needed. And at last, after long years of fruitless searching, the grey wizard found the lost king, for he came once again, secretly and at great peril, into the grim hold of the shadow in the south of the forest. And there, in the dark pits beneath it, he came upon the dwarf king, broken now and dying after long torment, his mind all but gone. And the king, in his last and failing wits, gave into Gandalf's keeping a small thing that he had somehow kept hidden through all his torment, a map and a key, a map of the lonely mountain in the east, and a key to a secret door in its side. And he begged the wizard, with his failing breath, to see that they came at last into the hands of his son, though the king himself could no longer remember even his own son's name. Gandalf took the map and the key, and grieved over the dying king, and could do nothing more for him, and slipped away again out of the dark hold before he should be discovered. But far more than the map and the key, he carried away from that grim place a far heavier knowledge, for in those dark pits he had at last looked closely upon the shadow that dwelt there, and had at last perceived, beyond any further doubt, what it truly was. It was no mere wraith-servant after all, no lesser shade, but the great enemy himself, the old shadow of the world, slowly and secretly clothing himself again in power in that hidden hold, and waiting and watching, and searching even then for the one ring that he had lost so long ago, the master ring into which he had poured so much of his own dark might, for he knew that if ever it were found and returned to him, his victory over the whole world would be swift and sure and final. With that dread certainty heavy upon him, the grey wizard made his escape, and went in haste to the council of the wise, and laid before them all that he had learned, that the shadow in the forest was the great enemy himself, returned and growing in strength, that he was searching for the lost master ring, and that if the wise did not strike at him swiftly while he was still gathering himself, and not yet at his full might, then the day might come when it would be too late to strike at all. And the grey wizard urged the council, with all the earnestness of his deep heart, to fall upon the enemy at once, before he should grow stronger, before he should find the ring, while there was yet time to drive him out and to set the world back from the brink. But the chief of the order, the white wizard who led the council, counselled otherwise. He counselled patience, and watching and waiting, and held that it would be rash and unwise to strike too soon, and he assured the council that the master ring was surely lost forever, rolled away down some river to the sea long ago and gone beyond all finding, so that there was no urgent need to fear its return to the enemy's hand. And the council, swayed by the learning and the authority of its chief, agreed with him, and held back, and did not strike, and the chance was let slip. And only afterward, long afterward, would it become clear why the white wizard had been so very eager to counsel against the search for the ring. For in the secret depths of his own proud heart, he too had begun to desire that ring, and to dream of finding it himself, and of wielding its power for his own ends. And his counsel of patience had been, beneath its show of wisdom, a counsel of quiet and growing treachery. But that bitter truth lay hidden still, and the seed of jealousy planted long before in the white wizard's heart had not yet grown into its full dark flower. Let it lie quiet in the dark a while longer, and let your own breathing go slow and easy, for there is no danger here that can touch you, only an old tale recounted softly a long way off. As the years went on after the council's choice to wait, the grey wizard grew ever more uneasy, for he saw the pieces of a coming peril beginning to move upon the wide board of the world. He learned that the great fireworm, the dragon that had long ago seized the lonely mountain in the east, still lay upon its vast stolen hoard within those hollow halls, sleeping fitfully upon a bed of gold, a danger slumbering but not slain. And the grey wizard's deep mind began to turn upon a fear that troubled him greatly, that if ever the great enemy in the south of the forest should think to make common cause with that dragon in the east, the two of them together, the shadow and the worm, might gain the mastery of all the northern lands, and seize the high passes and the open ways, and there would be no force in the north able to stand against so dreadful an alliance. And so the grey wizard cast about in his mind for some way to forestall that danger before it should come to pass, some way to see the dragon dealt with and the lonely mountain set back into friendly hands before the enemy could think to make use of it. And it was while this fear was heavy upon him that fortune, or perhaps something deeper and kindlier than fortune, brought the grey wizard together by chance with the very person who might unknowingly serve his purpose. For it happened one evening, in a small and weathered inn in a village that stood at a meeting of old roads, that the grey wizard fell into talk with a wandering dwarf lord, a proud and grim and exiled prince, none other than the son and heir of that lost king who had died in the dark pits of the Shadow's Hold so long before, the rightful lord of the very people the dragon had driven from the lonely mountain. And this exiled prince, it transpired, was even then nursing a fierce and long-cherished plan of his own, to gather a company of his scattered kin, and to journey east at last to the lonely mountain, and there to find some way to slay or to dispossess the dragon, and to win back the kingdom and the hoard of his fathers. And so the two of them sat long together in the firelit corner of that old inn, the grey wizard and the exiled dwarf prince, and they talked, and their two purposes ran together like two streams meeting in a single channel, the wizard's wish to see the dragon dealt with, and the northern danger forestalled, and the prince's burning wish to win back his lost home. And before they parted that night it was resolved between them that they should join their fates and journey east together toward the lonely mountain. And so was conceived in the warm corner of a wayside inn on an ordinary evening, the great quest that would set so much else in motion. And Gandalf still had the map and still had the key that he had carried away so long before from the dying king in the dark, and now at last he knew into whose hands they were meant to go. Hold that warm, small scene as you drift, a low-beamed inn on a rainy night, a fire crackling on the hearth, two travellers bent close together in earnest talk, while the rain whispers on the window, and out of that small and cosy conversation, all unknown to the wide, dark world outside, the first turning of a great and hopeful wheel. And so it was that not long after that rainy meeting, the grey wizard came walking one fine morning into the little green country of the hobbits, with a plan already half-formed in his deep mind, for he had decided that the company of dwarves bound east for the lonely mountain wanted one more member to make their venture whole, and that the member they wanted was a hobbit. It was a strange notion, and the dwarves, when he proposed it, thought it stranger still, for what use could a small, soft, comfortable, burrow-dwelling hobbit possibly be upon so perilous a road? But the grey wizard had not forgotten the deep and stubborn courage he had once glimpsed in the little folk in the depths of a hard winter, and he had marked out one particular hobbit, a comfortable, respectable, unadventurous gentleman of the green country, in whom he perceived, beneath all the comfort and the respectability, a buried spark of something braver and wilder and older, and he was determined that this spark should have its chance to wake. And so the grey wizard came to the round green door of that comfortable hobbit, and with a great deal of patience and a great deal of gentle persistence and not a little quiet cunning, he set about persuading the reluctant little fellow to leave his warm hole and his second breakfasts and his quiet, comfortable life behind, and to go off into the wild on a dangerous adventure with a company of dwarves he had never met, to face a dragon at the far end of the world. It took no small amount of convincing, for the hobbit wanted nothing less in all the world than an adventure, and said so many times and at considerable length. But the grey wizard, who knew the hobbit's heart better than the hobbit knew it himself, would not be put off, and in the end the buried spark did indeed wake, as Gandalf had known it would, and the comfortable little hobbit went running out of his round green door one bright morning with no hat and no walking stick and no pocket handkerchief, off into an adventure that would change his life, and in the slow turning of years, the fate of the whole world besides. Now the grey wizard did not go all the long way to the lonely mountain with that company of dwarves and their reluctant little burglar, but he went with them through the first and most perilous part of their road, and in that part his help was very great, for the company would surely have come to grief a dozen times over without him, when they fell into the clutches of a band of great hungry trolls upon a lonely road, lumbering man-eating brutes of the wild who meant to roast them all for supper. It was the grey wizard who saved them, slipping unseen among the trolls in the dark and setting them quarreling with one another by mimicking their voices, keeping them arguing and squabbling until the sun rose over the eastern hills and turned the dull-witted creatures into harmless stone, for it was the doom of such trolls to be turned to lifeless rock by the touch of the daylight. And in the trolls' foul hoard, the loot of their long murders, the grey wizard found 2 ancient swords of wonderful make, blades forged long ago by the smiths of a fair and fallen elven city, swords that gleamed cold and blue in the dark when danger drew near. And one of these blades he took for himself, a long bright sword whose old name meant the foe hammer, and he bore it ever after, and it would serve him well in dark and desperate hours yet to come. And when the company climbed up at last into the high passes of the great snow-capped mountains, and were caught there by a terrible storm of thunder and stone, and were driven for shelter into a cave that proved to be a trap, a back door into the swarming tunnels of the foul mountain goblins who dwelt in the dark beneath the peaks, it was again the grey wizard who saved them, appearing suddenly in a blinding flash of light in the deep goblin halls, scattering the foul creatures before him, cutting down their great and dreadful king with his bright blue blade, and leading the company down and out through the black tunnels to the light and the open air beyond. And when even then they were not yet safe, but were treed upon the edge of a precipice by a howling pack of wargs and goblins as the night came down, it was the grey wizard's old friendship with the lords of the great eagles that saved them all, for the eagles came sweeping down out of the darkening sky, vast and golden and proud, and bore the whole imperilled company up and away upon their broad wings, out of the reach of the snapping jaws below, and set them down safe upon a high and lonely crag far off beneath the cold stars. And afterward, the grey wizard led the weary company down to the house of a strange and mighty man who could take at need the shape of a great bear, a fierce and solitary lord of the wild, who loved no dwarf and trusted no stranger. And there too the wizard's careful cunning and gentle persuasion won them shelter and food and rest, before at last he parted from them at the edge of the dark forest, for other and graver matters were calling him away, and the company must go on toward the lonely mountain without him, taking with them all that he had taught them, and all the courage he had helped to wake. For what called the grey wizard away from his friends at the edge of the forest was nothing less than the great matter of the shadow in the south of the wood, the matter that had lain unfinished and let slip so long ago, when the council had chosen to wait. An urgent meeting of the wise had been called, and the grey wizard, who had never ceased to believe that the enemy must be struck before he could grow too strong, went to that meeting resolved at last to win the council to action. And this time he succeeded, for the danger had grown too plain to be longer denied, and even the chief of the order, the white wizard, was at last brought to agree, whether out of true conviction or out of some deeper and more secret reckoning of his own, that the time had come to drive the enemy from the grim hold in the forest. And so the wise gathered their strength and fell upon the dark hold at last, and assailed it with all their power. And the enemy, not yet strong enough to stand against the open might of the council, was driven out and forced to flee away from his hidden fastness in the forest, and to withdraw at last to the black land in the far south and east that had been the seat of his power in the elder days. It seemed a great victory, and in a way it was, for the shadow was driven from the north, and the great forest began slowly to be cleansed of its long sickness. And yet the wiser among the wise, the grey wizard chief among them, knew in their hearts that it was no final victory at all, but only the moving of the enemy from one stronghold to another. For the enemy had not been destroyed, but only displaced, and he had gone, moreover, exactly where he had long intended to go, back to his ancient seat in the south, where in time he would raise up his power greater and more terrible than ever. The shadow had been driven from the wood, but the shadow was not gone. Still, let us not dwell upon that cold knowledge tonight, but rest instead in the seeming victory, in the cleansing of the great forest, in the slow returning of light beneath those long darkened trees. And while the wise were assailing the dark hold in the forest, far away in the east, the company of dwarves and their small burglar had come at last, through many further perils that the grey wizard was not there to share, to the lonely mountain itself, and there great events had unfolded. The reluctant little hobbit had grown braver and cleverer and more resourceful than anyone, least of all himself, would once have believed possible, and he had crept down alone into the dragon's lair, and had matched wits with the terrible worm in the dark, and had found the one bare patch in its armored hide. And in the end the great fireworm, roused to fury, had flown out in flame against a nearby town of men upon a long cold lake, meaning to burn it to ashes in its rage. And there a grim and steady archer among the men of that town, warned of the worm's one weak place, had loosed a single black arrow into the bare patch above its heart and brought the great dragon crashing down dead into the dark waters of the lake. And so the dragon was slain. The danger that the grey wizard had so long feared was ended, and the lonely mountain and its vast hoard stood open at last, masterless, with the dwarves come home again to the threshold of their ancient kingdom. But the slaying of the dragon, as so often happens in the affairs of the world, did not bring peace but quarrelling, for the vast hoard of the mountain now lay open and unclaimed, and many came hurrying to claim a share of it. The homeless men of the burned lakeside town, who had suffered the dragon's fire and felt themselves owed recompense. The fair folk of the great forest, who had old grievances and old claims of their own, and the dwarves within the mountain led by their proud exiled prince, who in the sudden recovery of his ancestral wealth had been seized by a dark and grasping fever of the heart, the old curse of gold lust that so often fell upon his kind, and who would yield nothing to anyone, and shut himself and his kin within the mountain, and prepared to defend the hoard against all comers. And so it came about that armies gathered before the lonely mountain, the men and the fair folk on one side, and the dwarves within on the other, and a bitter battle between former friends seemed about to break out over the dead dragon's gold. And it was at that very moment, with the lines drawn and the battle about to begin, that the grey wizard came striding suddenly into their midst, having hastened east as fast as he could once the dark hold in the forest had fallen, and he stood between the gathered hosts and stayed their hands, and lifted up his voice and warned them all of a far greater peril sweeping down upon them even then. For he had learned in his coming that the foul goblins and savage wolves of the mountains, hearing of the dragon's death and the masterless hoard, were even then pouring down out of the high places in a great host of their own, meaning to fall upon the divided and quarrelling armies of men and elves and dwarves, while they were busy fighting one another, and to seize the mountain and its treasure for the shadow's own dark ends. And the grey wizard, with all the urgency of his great heart, called upon the quarrelling peoples to lay aside their grievances at once and to stand together against the common foe, lest they all be destroyed piecemeal in their division. And they heard him just in time, and the men and the fair folk and the dwarves turned from their quarrel and made common cause, and stood together against the descending host of goblins and wolves. And there was fought before the lonely mountain a great and terrible battle, the battle of the 5 armies, in which the free peoples, fighting at last as one, broke and scattered the host of the shadow and held the mountain. It was a near thing, and a bloody one, and not all who fought in it lived to see the victory, for the proud dwarf prince himself fell in the battle, but won back at the last, in his dying, the nobility and the open-handedness that the gold fever had stolen from him, and made his peace with his small friend the hobbit, and died reconciled. And so the danger of the north was ended, the dragon slain, the shadow driven from the forest, the mountain set back into friendly hands, and all of it set in motion, when you trace it back by an old grey wizard's quiet conversation in a wayside inn, and his stubborn faith in the buried courage of a small, soft, comfortable hobbit who had wanted nothing in all the world but to be left alone with his second breakfast. There is a lesson in that, perhaps, for those who care to find one, but you need not look for it now. Only rest in the warm thought of old quarrels healed and old enemies turned at last into friends, of a great peril met and overcome by people standing together, and of a small brave hobbit going home at last, much changed, toward his round green door. And so the grey wizard journeyed home again at last, with the small hobbit at his side, the two of them travelling back westward at an easy pace through the lands they had crossed in such haste before, stopping along the way at the house of the bear man, who welcomed them now as friends, and resting in the fair hidden valley among the eastern mountains, where the lord of that refuge gave them shelter and good counsel, and where they told over all that had befallen since they last had passed that way. And it was a pleasant homecoming, full of the warmth that comes after great labours safely ended, and the grey wizard saw the small hobbit safely back to his round green door in the green country at last, much changed from the comfortable fellow who had run out of it without a handkerchief, richer now and wiser and full of strange tales that his respectable neighbours would never quite believe. And the grey wizard, for his part, came away from that whole long venture more certain than ever of a thing he had begun to suspect long before, that the small folk of the green country, and this small hobbit in particular, were worthy of far more attention and far more watching than the great world had ever thought to give them. And so he resolved to keep his eye upon that quiet green country and its quiet people, and to come visiting now and again over the years to come, with his news and his fireworks and his watchful, affectionate care. For there was one thing, above all, that troubled the grey wizard's deep thought when he looked back upon that whole adventure. One small thing that the little hobbit had found upon the road, deep in the dark beneath the Goblin Mountains, in the course of his perils there. It was a ring. A plain golden ring, with no stone and no device upon it, that the hobbit had picked up almost by chance in the dark and slipped into his pocket. And that had proved, when he came to understand its use, to have a strange and wonderful property, that whoever wore it upon his finger became at once invisible, vanishing wholly from sight, so that the wearer might walk unseen wherever he wished. It had been of great service to the little hobbit on his adventure, that ring of invisibility, and he had grown very fond of it, and kept it close and secret, and seldom spoke of it, and was strangely unwilling to part with it, or even to let it out of his keeping. And it was just that strange unwillingness, that secrecy, that small, uncharacteristic shadow that had fallen across the honest hobbit's dealings whenever the ring was in question, that troubled the grey wizard, and set a slow, cold doubt working in the back of his deep mind. For he knew none better that there were rings of power in the world, rings of grave and terrible making, and he could not wholly silence the small, persistent fear that this plain golden ring, this little trinket found by chance in the dark, might be something far older and far darker and far more dangerous than a mere convenient toy of invisibility. But it was only a fear, only a doubt, and he had no proof, and there were so very many other matters pressing upon him. And so he set the doubt aside for the while and let the matter rest, though he never quite forgot it and never quite stopped watching. The years went on after that, quiet years upon the surface of things, though beneath that quiet the slow tide of the shadow rose ever higher in the south. For the enemy, having withdrawn at last to his ancient black land, declared himself openly there, and rebuilt his dark tower, and gathered his strength without further concealment, and the long pretence of peace was over. And the wise met together one last time in council, to take counsel about the rings of power, and what should be done. And at that last meeting the old jealousy in the heart of the White Wizard, the chief of the order, came at last to its bitter ripeness. For the White Wizard had grown to resent the Grey One deeply, resenting his freedom, resenting the love that the free peoples bore him, resenting most of all the deep regard in which the Lady of the Golden Wood and the other wise ones held him, and he began in secret to set spies upon the Grey Wizard's movements, to learn where he went and what he cared for and what he was about. And in this secret spying the White Wizard discovered the Grey One's strange and persistent interest in the little folk of the green country, and learned of the existence of that quiet people and their quiet land, which the great world had so long overlooked, and he marked it and filed it away in his own dark and calculating thought. And so the secret of the small folk passed, all unknowing, into the keeping of one who would in time become their enemy. And the shadow in the south, learning at last of the small folk and their country, likewise turned a portion of his watchfulness toward that green land and the roads that led to it. So even the love and the watchful care that the Grey Wizard bore the little folk had, all unintended, drawn the eyes of the great and the dark toward their quiet doorsteps. But let that lie too, gently in the dark, for the night is deep and the danger is far off and long ago. And around this time the Grey Wizard learned of a strange and miserable creature, a small wretched thing that had once, long ago, been something not unlike a hobbit, but that had been twisted and shrunken and ruined into something pale and slinking and cold by the long possession of a certain ring, the very ring, as it would in the end prove, that the little hobbit had found by chance in the dark. For it was from this wretched creature, in the black depths beneath the Goblin Mountains, that the hobbit had taken the ring, and the creature had never forgiven the loss, and had crept and crawled and slunk at last out of the dark and into the wide world, hunting for the ring it called its own, its precious, the only thing it had ever loved, hating the one who had taken it and bent upon recovering it again. And the Grey Wizard heard rumors of this creature's hunting, of its slow and dreadful journey through the wild, and yet, he afterward confessed with deep and bitter regret, he did not give the matter the attention it so gravely warranted, for he had so very many other cares upon him, and he was not yet certain that the hobbit's ring was the ring of dread that he feared it might be, and the trail of the wretched creature was cold and faint and hard to follow, and so he let the matter rest a second time, and did not pursue it as he should have done, and afterward he counted that letting rest among the gravest mistakes of his long life, for from that small neglect great peril would in time arise. But he was not yet to know it, and we will not blame him for it tonight, for the truly wise are wise enough to know that they too can err, and gentle enough to forgive themselves at last, and that too is a kind of wisdom worth carrying down towards sleep. The years went on, and the grey wizard, in his wanderings, came to know and to love and to make common cause with a great and noble man, the last hidden heir of an ancient and fallen line of kings, a ranger of the wild who walked the lonely lands in worn and travel-stained gear, unknown and unhonored, but who carried within him the long descent of a royal house and the slow kindling hope of its restoration. And the two of them, the wandering wizard and the hidden king, became fast friends and steadfast allies, bound together in the great and unspoken purpose of the age, the overthrow, at last, of the shadow in the south. And the grey wizard came also, in those years, to know the proud and ancient realm of men that lay nearest to the shadow's black land, a kingdom of high white stone and long memory and dwindling strength that stood as the chief bulwark of the West against the dark, and he gave his counsel freely there, and won the friendship and the love of some, and the suspicion and the resentment of others, for the proud and the powerful do not always love to be counselled by a wandering old man in a grey cloak. And through all those years he kept returning, again and again, to the quiet green country of the little folk, watching over the old hobbit who had found the ring, who did not seem to age as he should have done, and over that hobbit's young cousin and heir, a thoughtful and gentle young hobbit who reminded the wizard much of his old friend in his younger days, and who would, though none yet guessed it, come to carry upon his own small shoulders the heaviest burden in all the world. And at last there came a year in which the grey wizard returned to the green country for a very particular occasion, a great birthday party for the old hobbit who had found the ring, a feast and a celebration to mark a milestone of years, with much food and much drink, and a wonderful display of the grey wizard's most marvellous fireworks lighting up the soft evening sky over the green hills, to the delight of every hobbit, young and old. But beneath the merriment of that party there was a graver matter afoot, for the old hobbit had at last resolved to leave the green country forever, and to go off into the wider world to rest and to wander in his last years. And the grey wizard had come not only to celebrate but to see to a certain difficult thing, to persuade the old hobbit, gently but firmly, to leave the ring behind him when he went, to pass it on to his young heir, and not to carry it away with him into his wandering. For the wizard's old doubt about that ring had grown, over the long years, into a cold and steady fear, and he could see what the long keeping of the ring had begun to do to the old hobbit, the way it clung to him, and he to it, the way he could not bear to think of giving it up. And the wizard knew that such an unwillingness, in so honest and good-hearted a fellow, was itself a dark sign of the ring's slow and patient grip. And it was no easy thing, even so, to bring the old hobbit to let the ring go, for at the very last moment the grip of it tightened upon his heart, and he grew strange and sharp and unwilling, and it took all the grey wizard's gentle firmness, and at last a word of real and unaccustomed sternness, to bring him to set the ring down upon the mantle and to leave it behind at last, and to go off, light-hearted, into the dark, free of it for the first time in long years. And the wizard watched him go with relief and with love, and then turned his deep and troubled thought toward the ring that now lay in the keeping of the young heir, and toward the grave question of what that ring truly was. And so the grey wizard charged the young heir very earnestly to keep that ring safe and secret and hidden away, and above all, never to use it, never to slip it onto his finger and vanish into invisibility, for the wizard's fear had grown too great to be ignored, and he meant now at last to set his old neglect to rights, and to learn the truth of the matter once and for all. And then he set off into the wild, troubled and resolved to seek out the answers that he should have sought so long before. And the first thing he sought was the wretched, slinking creature that had once owned the ring, for he knew that if anyone in the world could tell him the ring's true history and its true nature, it was that miserable thing that had carried it in the dark for so many lifetimes of men. And for the long and patient hunting of that creature, the grey wizard turned to his friend, the hidden king, the ranger of the wild, who was a hunter without peer in all the lands, and who took up the cold and difficult trail and followed it through marsh and mountain and waste with a skill and a doggedness that no other could have matched, while the grey wizard pursued his own searchings elsewhere, seeking the truth of the ring in another way. For the grey wizard bethought himself at last of the old records, the ancient writings of the fallen kingdoms of men that lay gathering dust in the deep archives of the proud white city in the south. And he went there, and he searched through the crumbling scrolls and the forgotten parchments of long-dead lawmasters, hunting for any word, any account, any half-remembered note that might bear upon the lost master ring of the enemy, and how it might be known again if ever it were found. And at the last, deep in those neglected archives, he found what he sought, a faded scroll written long ago by the very king of men who had cut the master ring from the enemy's hand at the end of the Elder Age, a scroll in which that long-dead king had set down, in his own words, a description of the ring he had taken, and most precious of all, the secret by which the ring might be surely known. For the king had written that there was upon the ring a hidden inscription, fine lines of fiery letters that were invisible while the ring was cold, but that would shine forth, faint and red, when the ring was cast into fire. And the grey wizard read that ancient account, and his heart grew cold within him. For now at last he had the means to put his fear to the test, and now at last he might learn for certain whether the plain golden ring in the keeping of the young hobbit was indeed the lost master ring of the enemy himself. And while he pondered this, there came to him word from his friend, the hidden king, that the long hunt was ended, and that the wretched creature had at last been caught, far away in the marshes near the borders of the enemy's black land. And the grey wizard went swiftly to where the creature was held, and he questioned it, long and hard, with a grimness that was rare in him, but that the matter demanded. And from the broken and miserable thing he wrung out at last the truth of the ring's history, and worse than the history, a thing that struck him with sudden and terrible fear. For the creature confessed, under that hard questioning, that it had been taken once, long before, into the black land of the enemy, and there tormented, and that under that torment it had given up 2 words, 2 names, that the enemy had wrung from it, and those 2 names were the name of the green country of the little folk and the family name of the hobbit who now held the ring. And so the grey wizard understood, with a cold horror, that the enemy now knew exactly where to look for his lost ring, that he knew the country and the name, and that even now his dreadful servants might be setting out to seek the ring and to bring it back to him, and that the danger to the young hobbit and to all the green country and indeed to all the world had become sudden and pressing and dire. And in great haste he left the creature in safekeeping and turned and hastened back toward the green country, faster than he had travelled in many a long year, for now there was no more time to wait and to watch and to ponder, and the long-deferred reckoning had come at last. And when the grey wizard came again to the green country and to the round green door, and sat down at last with the young hobbit by the fire, he had with him the means to end all doubt, and there in the firelight he took the plain golden ring and cast it into the heart of the hot coals upon the hearth, and waited, and drew it out again unburned and cold, and there upon the cold gold, faint and red and fading, shone the fine fiery letters of the hidden inscription, exactly as the long-dead king had written so many ages before, and the grey wizard read them, and knew them for the words of an old and dreadful spell of mastery and domination. And so the last doubt was gone, and the cold truth stood plain at last. The plain golden ring that the little hobbit had picked up by chance in the dark beneath the mountains, the convenient toy of invisibility that the old hobbit had carried so long and given up so hardly, was the one ring, the master ring, the very ring of the enemy himself, into which he had poured so much of his own dark might so long ago, the ring he had been seeking ever since, the ring that, if ever it should come again into his hand, would give him the swift and final mastery of all the world. And it lay there, that ring of doom, cold upon the table, in a small, comfortable hobbit hole, in the keeping of a gentle young hobbit who wanted no part of any of it, far from the great affairs of the world, and the whole fate of everything now turned upon what should be done with it, and upon the courage of the small folk that the grey wizard, alone among the wise, had thought to watch and to trust. It was in the soft season of spring that the grey wizard at last confirmed to the young hobbit the terrible truth of what he held, and counselled him, with all gentleness and all urgency, that he must leave the green country and bear the ring away to safety in the fair hidden valley of the eastern mountains, where the wise might take counsel together upon what should be done with it. For the green country was no longer safe, and the ring could not stay there with the servants of the enemy already turning their search toward its borders. And the young hobbit, frightened but resolute, agreed to go, though he asked leave to set out quietly and without haste a little later in the year, so as not to draw suspicion upon his going. And the wizard, judging that there was a little time yet, consented. And the grey wizard stayed near the young hobbit through the early months of that fateful year, watching over him and helping him prepare in secret for his going. And then at last, troubled by dark tidings out of the south of war stirring and the shadow growing, and wishing to take counsel with the chief of his own order before the great matter went further, he bade the young hobbit a temporary farewell and promised faithfully to return before the hobbit's own departure so that they might travel together and set off southward on the road, never dreaming how badly that promise was about to be broken, and through no fault of his own. For upon that southward road a thing befell the grey wizard that changed all his plans and brought him into the gravest peril he had known in all his long years in the mortal lands. He met upon the way one of his own order, a gentle wizard who dwelt deep in the wild woods and loved beasts and birds above all else. And this wood-loving wizard brought him urgent and frightening news that the dread wraith servants of the enemy, the most terrible of all his slaves, were abroad in the lands again, riding in the shapes of black horsemen, and were even then making their way toward the green country in search of the ring. And the wood-loving wizard told him also that the chief of their order, the white wizard who led the council, had sent for the grey one and bidden him come, with word that the white wizard had counsel for him in this dark hour. And so the grey wizard, alarmed by the news of the black riders but trusting still in the chief of his order, turned his road toward the tall, dark tower in the south where the white wizard dwelt, pausing only to leave behind, at the weathered inn in the village at the meeting of the roads, a letter of urgent warning for the young hobbit, bidding him flee the green country at once and not to wait, and entrusting that letter to the keeping of the innkeeper to be sent on with all speed. And then he rode hard for the white wizard's tower to take the counsel that had been promised him, all unsuspecting of what awaited him there. And what awaited him there was treachery, for when the grey wizard came to the foot of the tall dark tower and was admitted into the presence of the chief of his order, he found that the white wizard had changed, terribly and utterly, and had at last fallen wholly into the long shadow that had been growing in his proud heart for so many years. The white wizard had given up the long labour of opposing the enemy, and had resolved instead to make himself a power in the world, to seize the master ring for his own if he could, and to set himself up as a lord and a master over others. And he had even begun, in his pride, to imagine that he might treat with the great enemy as an equal and share in his dominion. And he sought now to draw the grey wizard into his treachery, to make him a partner in his new and dreadful designs. And when the grey wizard refused him steadfastly and with a great and quiet sorrow, at the fall of one who had once been the chief and the best of their order, the white wizard's mask of fair words fell away, and he showed his true face, and he made the grey wizard his prisoner, and shut him up alone at the very pinnacle of the tall, dark tower, high above the world, where he could neither escape nor send any word, and there he left him, hoping to break his will, or to learn from him the hiding place of the ring. And so the grey wizard, who should even then have been hastening back to the green country to fulfill his promise and guide the young hobbit to safety, was held captive instead at the top of a lonely tower far away, while the black riders drew ever nearer to the unsuspecting little folk. And the appointed time of his return came and went, and the promise he had so faithfully made was broken, not through any failing of his own, but through the treachery of one he had trusted too long. Let your heart not be troubled by this, even so, for he is far away and long ago, and the danger cannot reach you in your warm and quiet dark. Only let the tale carry you onward gently, as a slow river carries a fallen leaf. But the grey wizard was not without friends, even at the top of that lonely tower, for he had long ago befriended the lords of the great eagles, those proud and golden creatures of the high airs, and it was the chief of the eagles who came at last, sweeping down out of the wide sky to the pinnacle of the dark tower, and bore the captive wizard up and away upon his broad wings, out of the reach of the treacherous chief of the order, and carried him far off across the lands and set him down in the green country of the horse lords, the wide grassy plains in the south where men bred and rode the finest horses in all the world. And there the grey wizard, in great need and great haste, sought a mount swift enough to carry him to the green country of the little folk before it should be too late, and there he found running wild and free upon the green plains the chief of all the horses of that land, a great silver-grey stallion of surpassing swiftness and beauty and intelligence, swifter than the wind, who would suffer no man to ride him, but who came at the grey wizard's call, and consented for love and for the great need of the hour to bear him. And the grey wizard mounted that wonderful horse and rode like the wind itself toward the green country, faster than any rider had ever ridden, his grey cloak streaming behind him and the wide miles falling away beneath the silver hooves, racing against the black riders and against time itself to reach the little folk before the shadow could. But he came too late, for all his haste, for when he reached the green country at last, he found that the young hobbit had already gone, having waited for the promised return as long as he dared. And then, when the wizard did not come, and the black riders began to be glimpsed upon the borders, having set out at last upon his own, with a few faithful friends, to make his perilous way eastward toward the hidden valley as the wizard had bidden him. And the grey wizard learned, to his dismay, that the letter of urgent warning he had left at the wayside inn had never been sent, for the innkeeper, an honest but forgetful man, had set it aside and forgotten it, so that the young hobbit had set out far later than he should have done, and into far greater peril. And the grey wizard, learning all this, feared greatly for the young hobbit, alone in the wild, with the dread riders hunting him, and he rode on in haste along the eastward road, hoping against hope to overtake him, or to find some word of him. And though he did not know it, the young hobbit and his friends had by then fallen, by great good fortune, under the protection of the grey wizard's own friend, the hidden king and ranger of the wild, who had met them at the very inn where the forgotten letter lay, and had taken them under his guidance, and was even then leading them by secret ways through the wild toward the hidden valley, guarding them as best he could against the hunting riders. So the young hobbit was not, after all, wholly without help, though the grey wizard could not yet know it. The grey wizard rode on alone, and came in time to a lonely hill that rose above the wild lands, an old broken watchtower upon its crown, a high vantage from which one might look out over all the surrounding country, and he climbed it, seeking to spy out the land and to learn where his friends and his enemies might be. But there, upon that lonely hilltop, in the dark of night, the dread riders found him and fell upon him, all the black servants of the enemy together, and there was fought upon that high broken hill a fierce and terrible battle in the deep of the night, a battle of fire and of shadow, the grey wizard standing alone against the gathered might of the enemy's most dreadful slaves, the white flame of his power against their cold and creeping dark. And though they were many and he was one, he was not overcome, but drove them off at the last with great labour, and left his mark upon the old stones of the hilltop as a sign and a warning to any friend who should come after. And then, sorely pressed and pursued by some of the riders, even in his retreat he turned and fled away northward, drawing a part of the enemy's hunt after himself and away from his friends, and so, all unknowing, made the road a little safer for the young hobbit who came after. There is a kind of quiet heroism in that, is there not? In the drawing away of danger from those one loves, in the choosing to be hunted oneself that another might go free. And it was a thing the grey wizard did again and again across the long years, always asking nothing, always slipping away unthanked into the dark. And the grey wizard, having drawn off a part of the hunt, turned then, and made for the hidden valley of the eastern mountains as swiftly as he could, knowing that there, if anywhere, the young hobbit would at last find safety, and meaning to be there before him to aid in his coming. And the young hobbit, guided by the ranger of the wild, came at last, sorely wounded by a cruel blade of the enemy upon that very lonely hilltop where the wizard had fought, and failing fast to the very borders of the hidden valley, with the dread riders close upon his heels. And at the last crossing of the river that warded the valley, the riders sought to seize him, but the lord of the valley, who had power over the waters of his land, sent down a great flood roaring along the riverbed, white horses of foam rising up in the torrent, and swept the black riders away and drowned their dark steeds beneath the churning water. And so the young hobbit was carried at last, fainting and near to death, across the river and into the safety of the hidden valley, where the healing arts of its lord were brought to bear upon his grievous wound, and slowly, slowly he was drawn back from the very edge of the shadow and made whole again. And the grey wizard was there, and watched over the wounded hobbit through the long days of his healing, and rejoiced greatly when at last the young hobbit opened his eyes, and knew his friends again and was out of danger. And the two of them were reunited at last after all the long perils of that road, in the warm firelit safety of the fairest house east of the sea. Rest there a while, in that thought, in that warm and firelit safety, in that fair house among the falling waters and the autumn trees, where the weary and the wounded came to be healed, and where for a little while all the dark roads of the world were held at bay. For the hidden valley was a place of refuge, and of healing, and of long memory, kept by an ancient and noble lord of the fair folk, and to it now there came, summoned by the gathering peril, messengers, and wise ones and lords and representatives of many of the free peoples of the world, gathering to take counsel together upon the gravest matter of the age, the matter of the master ring that the young hobbit had borne thither at such cost. And there was held in that fair house a great council, at which all that was known of the ring and the enemy and the perils of the age was laid open and pondered, and at which the dreadful question was at last faced squarely: what should be done with the master ring of the enemy, now that it had been found again and brought out of hiding? It could not be used, for to wield it, even against the enemy, even with the best of intentions, would be only to set up a new dark lord in place of the old. For the ring was wholly evil and would corrupt utterly any who tried to master it. It could not be hidden, for no hiding place in all the world would be safe forever from the enemy's long searching. It could not be sent away over the sea, for the powers across the water would not receive so dark a thing, nor would the bearing of it thither do anything but defer the peril. There remained only one road, the hardest and the most hopeless-seeming road of all, that the ring must be unmade, destroyed, and that it could be destroyed in only one place in all the world, in the very fire in which it had been forged long ago, the fire that burns still in a mountain of fire deep in the heart of the enemy's own black land, beneath the very windows of his dark tower. And so the ring must be carried, by some impossibly daring and impossibly desperate errand, into the very heart of the enemy's realm, and cast into the fire there, and so unmade, and the enemy with it, before he should grow too strong and find it first. And when the council had seen at last that this was the only road, there came the dreadful question of who should bear the ring upon that hopeless errand, and into the long and fearful silence that followed, the young hobbit, the small and gentle hobbit of the green country, who had wanted no part of any of it, and who trembled at the very thought, rose up nonetheless and offered himself, saying in his small frightened voice that he would take the ring, though he did not know the way. And the grey wizard, hearing that small voice take up so great and terrible a burden, was moved in the depths of his ancient heart, for here was that very courage of the small folk that he had glimpsed so long before in the depths of a hard winter, the deeper and stubborn courage that asked for no glory and shrank from no duty, the courage upon which, alone among all the wise, he had set his hope. And the council accepted the young hobbit's offer, and chose a small fellowship of companions to go with him upon the road, 9 walkers to stand against the 9 dread riders of the enemy, drawn from the free peoples of the world, men and dwarf and fair folk and hobbits, and at their head, as guide and counsellor, the grey wizard himself, who would not let the young hobbit go upon so dark a road without him. And so the Fellowship of the Ring was formed and made ready, and set out at last from the hidden valley, in the cold of winter, southward into the wild, upon the most desperate errand in all the long history of the world. Now the first great labour of the Fellowship was to cross the mighty range of snow-capped mountains that barred their southward way, and the grey wizard sought to lead them over a high pass through the peaks, that they might avoid the dangers of the lower lands. But the mountains themselves seemed set against them, for a terrible storm of wind and snow came howling down upon the high pass as they climbed, heaping the snow about them in great drifts, blinding them with the driving white, threatening to bury them and freeze them where they stood. And whether that cruel storm was the mere malice of the mountains, or whether some darker will had stirred it up against them, none could say for certain. But it was too great for them, and they could not win over the pass, and they were forced at last to turn back, beaten by the snow, and to seek some other road through or around the great mountains. And there was only one other road that lay open to them, and it was the darkest and most dreadful of all, the road beneath the mountains, through the vast and ancient underground realm of the dwarf folk, that mighty kingdom of pillared halls and endless stairs, delved long ago into the very roots of the peaks, that same dark realm through which the grey wizard had passed once, alone, so very long before, in his old searchings. The Fellowship feared that road, and the grey wizard feared it most of all, for he alone among them knew what nameless terror was said to dwell in the deep places beneath that ruined kingdom. But there was no other way, and so with heavy hearts they turned their steps toward the hidden western doors of the underground realm. It took the grey wizard some long and anxious searching, when at last they stood before the blank stone of the western doors in the dark beneath the mountain shadow, to recall the secret word that would open them, for it had been many an age since he had passed that way, and the memory was faint and far, but at the last it came to him, a simple word of friendship in an old fair tongue, and the great doors of stone swung silently open, and the fellowship passed within into the vast and breathing dark of the underground realm, and the doors closed behind them, shutting out the last grey light of the world. And for long days they journeyed through that black labyrinth, through halls so vast that no torch could find their roofs, across chasms so deep that a dropped stone fell long and silent into nothing, upstairs and downstairs, and along endless passages of worked stone, with the grey wizard going ever before them, his staff lit with a soft and steady glow to light their way, leading them by memory and by deep wisdom through the maze of the dark. And it was a place of dread, that ruined kingdom, for once it had been full of light and the ringing of hammers and the song of a great people, and now it was silent and empty and given over to the dark, and there were signs everywhere of old battle and old slaughter, of a once great people destroyed, and the fellowship went softly and spoke little, and felt the weight of all that lost grandeur and all that long sorrow pressing down upon them out of the breathing dark. And in the deep heart of that ruined realm they came at last to a great hall, where they found grim proof of the fate of the dwarves who had ventured back there in a later age to try to reclaim their ancestral home. They found that those dwarves too had been overwhelmed and destroyed, and that the dark had taken back the kingdom utterly. And there in that hall of the dead the fellowship was discovered at last by the foul creatures that now infested the deeps, the goblins and orcs of the dark, who came swarming up out of the lower tunnels in their hundreds, drawn by the intrusion of the living. And there was a fierce and desperate battle in the hall, and the fellowship fought their way clear and fled onward through the dark toward the eastern gate and the hope of the daylight beyond. But behind the swarming goblins there came something far worse, a deeper and more dreadful terror, the very nameless thing that the grey wizard had feared above all, that ancient demon of fire and of shadow out of the deep places of the world, woken long ago by the too greedy delving of the dwarves, and now roused again and coming up out of the abyss to fall upon the intruders, a great dark shape wreathed in fire and in shadow, a thing of terror before which even the goblins themselves fled away in fear, a doom out of the elder days. And the fellowship fled before that terror toward the eastern gate, and their road brought them to a narrow bridge of stone, an ancient span without rail or parapet that arched in a single slender curve across a vast and bottomless chasm, the last barrier before the gate and the daylight. And the companions hastened across that narrow bridge one by one. But the grey wizard, when they were over, did not cross after them, but turned instead and stood alone upon the narrow span, facing back the way they had come, to bar the passage of the terror that pursued them, and to buy his friends the time they needed to escape. And the great dark shape of fire and shadow came on toward him, towering and terrible, wreathed in flame, and the grey wizard stood small and grey and alone upon the slender bridge before it, and he raised his staff, and he lifted up his voice, and he forbade the terror to pass, declaring that it should not cross the bridge, naming himself a servant of the secret fire and a wielder of the flame, and standing his ground though the thing of shadow loomed over him vast as a falling night. And the terror struck at him, and there was a clash of fire and a flare of white light upon the narrow bridge in the deep dark, and for a moment the two of them stood locked in that dreadful contest above the bottomless deep. And then the grey wizard smote the bridge with his staff, and the ancient stone broke and cracked beneath the feet of the terror, and the span gave way, and the great dark shape of fire and shadow fell, plunging down into the vast abyss below, down and down into the unmeasured dark. But even as it fell, the terror lashed out one last time with its long whip of flame, and the burning lash caught the grey wizard about the knees as he stood upon the broken edge of the bridge, and dragged him down and pulled him over the brink, and he fell too, down after the terror into the great chasm. And as he fell away into the dark he cried out to his stricken companions to fly, to go on without him, and then he was gone, lost from their sight, fallen away into the deep places of the world, and the fellowship, struck through with grief and horror, fled on through the eastern gate and out into the daylight at last, weeping, believing their guide and their friend was lost to them forever, fallen into shadow and into death in the dark beneath the mountains. Let your heart be at peace even here, in this, the darkest hour of the tale, for I will tell you a secret that the grieving fellowship did not yet know, that the grey wizard's tale did not end in that fall, that the dark did not have him after all, and that this was not, in truth, an ending at all, but the strange and terrible doorway to a new beginning. So do not grieve as the fellowship grieved, only breathe, slow and easy, and trust the tale, for the light is not gone, only hidden a while, as the sun is hidden in the deep watches of the night before it rises again. For the grey wizard fell indeed far down into the deep places of the world, into a black abyss beneath the very roots of the mountains, beyond the reach of any light or any living memory, into a cold and dreadful place of dark water at the very foundations of the earth. And the terror of fire and shadow fell with him, and there in the deep dark the contest between them was not ended but renewed, and the grey wizard pursued the fleeing terror through the long-forgotten ways beneath the world, through black tunnels gnawed by nameless things, past gulfs and chasms unknown to any tale, ever following, ever closing, until at the last they came up again, the two of them locked in their endless struggle, out of the deep places and up an immense and ancient winding stair that climbed within the very mountain itself, up and up through the dark toward the high places, until at last they came forth upon the very peak of the mountain, high above the world, upon a lonely pinnacle of stone beneath the open sky, where the cold winds blew and the clouds streamed past below, and the bare rock met the heavens. And there upon that high, lonely peak beneath the wheeling sky, the grey wizard and the terror of the elder world fought their last and greatest battle, fire against fire, for days that the world below could not count, until at the last the grey wizard overthrew the terror utterly and cast it down, ruined from the high place, broken at last. Its long evil ended. But the grey wizard too was spent in that final overthrow, spent utterly, his strength all poured out, and there upon the cold peak, with his great labour finished and his enemy destroyed, the body that he had worn so long failed him at last, and he passed away out of the world, his errand seemingly accomplished, and his life seemingly ended, alone upon the mountain top beneath the cold and silent stars. And yet that was not the end of him, for the grey wizard was no mortal man, but one of the ancient and deathless spirits of the world, sent into the mortal lands on an errand not yet finished, and the powers who had sent him long before, seeing that his errand was not yet done, and that the world had still the gravest need of him, sent him back. They returned him to life, and clothed him anew, and sent him once more into the mortal lands, but now greatly changed. For he came back stronger than he had been before, his power no longer veiled and hidden as it had been, but shining forth, his grey garments turned to white, his authority and his might enhanced and made manifest, so that he returned now not as the grey pilgrim, who had wandered so humbly for so long, but as a white rider, a lord of light and of power, come back from beyond the very edge of death to take up again the leadership of the free peoples in their darkest hour. And so the one who had been the grey wizard became now the white wizard in his stead, taking up the place and the office that the fallen traitor had forfeited by his betrayal, and he came back into the world like the dawn coming up after the longest and darkest of nights. Hold that thought close as you drift, the most comforting thought in all this long tale, that even the deepest fall, even death itself in the dark beneath the world, was not the end after all, that the light went down only to rise again brighter than before, and that the one who was lost came back, changed and shining, exactly when he was needed most. And the great eagle came again, the chief of the eagles who had aided the wizard so often before, and bore the reborn wizard down from the cold peak and away to a fair and hidden golden wood far below, the wood of the lady of the fair folk who had so long ago wished that the grey one should lead the council, and there in that golden wood, beneath the great silver-barked trees and the soft golden leaves, the lady received him and tended him and clothed him in fresh white garments, and gave him a new staff to bear, and told him such news as she had of the scattered fellowship, of how the company had been broken and sundered after his fall, of how the ring-bearer and his most faithful companion had gone on alone toward the Black Land, parted from the rest, and of how the others had been scattered by fresh misfortune. And the White Wizard, hearing all this, understood that he could not now go to the aid of the ring-bearer directly, for the ring-bearer had passed beyond his reach into the secret east, but that he might yet do great good among the others, and so he resolved to seek out the remnant of the fellowship that he could still reach, and to take up again his work of counsel and of leadership in the war that was now breaking openly upon all the lands of the West. And so the White Wizard set out from the Golden Wood, and came in time upon 3 of his scattered companions, the hidden king, and a fair archer of the elder folk, and a stout warrior of the dwarf kind, who had been pursuing across the wide plains a band of foul orcs that had carried off 2 of the smaller hobbits of the fellowship into captivity, and who had come now to the eaves of an ancient and brooding forest in their search. And the meeting of the White Wizard with these 3 was a moment of great joy and great wonder, for they had believed him dead, fallen forever in the dark beneath the mountains, and to see him now alive and shining and return to them, robed in white and greater than before, was like the lifting of a great weight of grief from their hearts, like the unlooked-for return of one mourned as lost. And the White Wizard told them, as much as they needed to know, of his fall and his struggle and his strange return, and gave them fresh counsel and fresh hope, and told them that their lost younger companions were, by an unlooked-for turn of fortune, safe and in good keeping, having escaped their captors and fallen in with the strange and ancient tree herds of the brooding forest. And so the 3 need no longer pursue them, but should turn their strength instead toward a graver and more pressing need. For there was a realm in dire peril near at hand, the green realm of the horse lords upon the wide plains, the very land that had given the wizard his wonderful silver steed, and that realm had fallen under a shadow, for its old king had grown bent and feeble and despairing under the slow poison of evil counsel, for a wicked and traitorous adviser had wormed his way into the king's confidence, and was slowly draining the strength and the will out of him and out of his whole people, working all the while in secret for the traitor wizard of the Dark Tower, who sought to bring that fair green realm to ruin. And so the White Wizard, with his 3 companions, rode to the golden hall of the king of the horse lords, and came into the dim and shadowed hall, where the old king sat hunched and grey, and lost upon his throne, and there the White Wizard cast down the wicked adviser, and broke the spell of despair that lay upon the king, and drew him up out of his long darkness, and led him out into the light and the clean wind, and the old king, freed at last from the slow poison, stood up straight and tall again, and felt his strength return, and his years seemed to fall away from him, and he took up his sword once more, and called his people to him for the war that was coming. And the White Wizard counselled the king to gather his people, and to make for a great fortress in the hills, a stronghold of ancient stone that had never fallen, where his people might be safe against the storm that was about to break, for the traitor wizard of the Dark Tower was even then sending forth a great host to fall upon the horse lords, and to destroy them utterly. And then the White Wizard, when he had set the king upon the road to the mountain fortress, rode away alone upon his silver steed, swift as thought, on a secret errand of his own, to gather together the scattered and far-flung riders of the realm, the companies that were riding leaderless and dismayed across the wide plains, and to bring them, at the very crisis of the coming battle, to the relief of the fortress. And the battle came, and it was a desperate one, for the great host of the traitor wizard came up against the mountain fortress in the dark and the rain, in numbers beyond counting, and assailed it through the long black hours of the night. And the defenders, few and weary, were driven back and back, until at the very last, as the dawn was breaking grey and cold, and the fortress seemed about to fall at last, there came a sudden trumpet call and a thunder of hooves, and the White Wizard appeared upon the high ridge above the battle in the first light of the rising sun, shining white upon his silver steed, with the gathered riders of the realm behind him, and they swept down upon the host of the enemy in the dawn light, and broke it utterly, scattering the dark host in ruin. And so the fortress was saved, and the realm of the horse lords delivered. And there is something in that image worth carrying down into your dreams, the white rider appearing in the first light of dawn upon the high ridge after the long and desperate night, the darkness broken and scattered before the rising sun, hope returning at the very last and uttermost moment, when all had seemed lost. For that, in the end, is what the White Wizard was, the rider who comes with the dawn, the one who appears when hope is spent, the kindler of the small fire that outlasts the long night. And after the battle was won, the White Wizard turned his attention to the Dark Tower of the traitor wizard, his fallen brother of the Order, whose host had been broken and whose power was now greatly diminished, for the ancient tree herds of the brooding forest, roused at last to wrath by the traitor's long cutting and burning of their beloved trees, had risen up in their slow and terrible strength, and had broken the dams, and loosed the floods, and torn down the works of the traitor, and laid waste his fortress, so that the proud, dark tower now stood alone amid ruin, and the traitor wizard was shut up within it, his armies destroyed, his power broken, a fallen and humbled thing. And the white wizard went to the foot of the dark tower, and called up to the traitor within, and offered him, even now, even after all his treachery, a last chance of repentance, a last chance to come down, and to forsake his evil, and to be freed of the long shadow that had ruined him. For the white wizard's heart, even toward the one who had betrayed and imprisoned him, was full still of the old pity and the old patience that he had learned so long ago in the house of mourning. But the traitor wizard, in his pride, would not repent, and spurned the offer of mercy, and answered only with scorn and with cunning and with poisoned words. And so the white wizard, with great sorrow but with great authority, did the thing that the office of the white wizard now empowered him to do. He cast the traitor out of their order, and stripped him of his rank and his power, and broke his staff of office, so that the fallen one was left at last with nothing, neither power nor honor nor place, a broken and friendless thing alone in his ruined tower, undone in the end not by force, but by his own long choosing of the dark. And the white wizard turned away from him, more in sorrow than in anger, and left him to his ruin, and rode on toward the next, and the greatest peril of all. For the white wizard knew now that the chief blow of the war was about to fall, not upon the green realm of the horse lords, but upon the proud white city of stone in the south, the great and ancient kingdom of men that stood as the chief bulwark of the west against the black land of the enemy. For the enemy was gathering all his strength to fall upon that city and to break it, knowing that if it fell, the whole west would lie open before him. And so the white wizard rode in haste toward the white city, taking with him one of the smaller hobbits of the fellowship, the merry and curious young one who had fallen, through a chain of small misfortunes, into a peril that the wizard judged it best to carry away with him. And they came at last, riding hard through the night upon the silver steed, to the great white city of many walls that climbed in 7 tiers up the side of a vast mountain spur, tier upon tier of white stone, rising toward a high citadel crowned with a white tower, the noblest work of the hands of men remaining in all the world, and the most beleaguered, for the shadow of the enemy lay heavy upon it, and the great assault was very near. And the white wizard came into the high citadel, and into the presence of the ruler of the city, the steward who governed it in the long absence of its kings, a proud and noble and embittered man, worn down by long care and long grief, and the slow despair that the enemy's malice had been working upon him in secret. And the steward received the white wizard with cold suspicion and ill grace, for he resented the wizard's counsel and feared his influence, and would not gladly hear the hard truths that the wizard had come to tell. But the wizard told them nonetheless that the great assault was at hand, that the city must make ready, that the beacons must be lit and the allies summoned, for the storm was about to break, and break it did. And the great assault broke upon the white city in a tide of darkness, for the enemy had sent forth a vast host out of his black land, led by the most dreadful of all his servants, the chief of the dread wraith riders, a captain of terror upon a winged steed of shadow, before whom the hearts of even brave men quailed and failed. And the host of the enemy laid siege to the white city, ringing it about with fire and with darkness, and they cast down great engines of destruction against its walls, and they spread a creeping darkness over all the land, so that the sun was hidden, and a false and dreadful night lay upon the city even at noonday, sapping the courage of its defenders. And through all that terror the white wizard stood upon the walls of the city, as a beacon of hope and of light, going here and there along the embattled tiers, kindling courage in the failing hearts of the defenders, his white robes shining in the murk, the one steady light in all that creeping dark, so that wherever he passed the men took heart again and stood firm, and the city held, hour by desperate hour, against the rising tide of the enemy. But the assault was relentless, and the great engines of the enemy battered without ceasing at the chief gate of the city, the strong and ancient gate that had never before been broken. And at the last, with a great spell of ruin and a final thunderous blow, the gate was burst asunder. And into the breach, into the very gateway of the white city, there rode the chief of the dread wraith riders himself, the captain of terror, vast and black and crowned with a cold and deathly light. And before him the defenders of the gate fled away in horror, all save one. For the white wizard alone did not flee, but came forward upon his silver steed, and set himself in the broken gateway, alone, facing the captain of terror, the small white figure against the great black shape, and forbade him to enter. And there, in the ruined gate, the two of them faced one another, the Lord of Light and the Lord of Terror, in a moment so charged with dread and with valor that it seemed the very fate of the world hung trembling upon it. And it might have come to a dreadful contest there in the gateway, but at that very instant, far off across the dark fields, there rose a sound that turned the captain of terror from the wizard, and changed the whole shape of the battle. The wild, clear, defiant calling of many horns, the horns of the horse lords, for the king of the green realm, freed from his long despair, and riding now in his full strength, had come at last, with all the gathered riders of his land to the relief of the white city, sweeping down out of the grey dawn upon the rear of the enemy's host. And the captain of terror, hearing those horns, turned away from the gate to meet this new and unlooked-for peril. And so the white wizard was spared that contest, and the gate for a moment held. Yet even as the horns of the horse lords brought hope to the failing city, a fresh grief and a fresh peril called the white wizard away from the battle at the gate. For the merry young hobbit came to him in great distress with dreadful tidings, that the proud steward of the city, broken at last by long grief and by the slow despair the enemy had been working upon him through a dark seeing stone, and believing his beloved son slain and the city doomed, had gone wholly out of his right mind, and meant in his madness to make a great pyre, and to burn himself alive upon it, and his son with him, the wounded son who yet lived, but whom the grief-maddened steward believed already dead. And the white wizard, hearing this, was torn between the battle at the gate and the lives in peril within, and chose, as he always chose, the saving of life over the winning of war, and turned away from the gate, and rode in haste up through the tears of the burning city to the high place where the mad steward had prepared his dreadful pyre, and came just in time to snatch the wounded son, living from the flames, though he could not save the steward himself, who cast himself upon the burning pyre, and perished there in his despair, beyond all the wizard's help. And the white wizard bore the rescued son away to the houses of healing, and so saved one life out of that madness, even as he grieved that he could not save the other, and then turned back at last toward the battle, which still raged on across the dark fields below. And the battle was won, in the end, for the riders of the horse lords, and a great fleet of unlooked-for allies that the hidden king brought up the river out of the south, together broke and scattered the great host of the enemy, and drove it from the field, and the siege of the white city was lifted, and the city stood battered and bleeding, but unconquered, with the sun breaking through at last upon its white towers. But the white wizard knew, even in the hour of that hard-won victory, that the war was very far from over, and that no force of arms, however valiant, could ever in the end overthrow the enemy, for so long as the Master Ring endured, the enemy could not be finally defeated, and the only hope of the world still lay where it had always lain, in the small and lonely figure of the ring-bearer, somewhere far off in the black land, struggling on toward the mountain of fire with his terrible burden. And so the white wizard counseled the captains of the West to a last and desperate stratagem, to gather what strength remained to them, and to march boldly to the very gate of the enemy's black land, and there to challenge him openly, not in any hope of victory by arms, for they had none, but as a feint, a desperate diversion to draw the eye and the thought and the watchfulness of the enemy outward to the threat at his gate, and away from the secret roads within his own land, where the small ring-bearer crept toward the fire, so that the enemy, in his pride and his contempt for the small host before his gate, might fail to look inward until it was too late. And so the captains of the West, understanding the desperate wisdom of it, gathered their small host and marched to the black gate of the enemy's land, the white wizard among them. And there before that dreadful gate they stood and challenged the enemy to come forth, a tiny host before the very threshold of darkness, knowing they could not win, offering themselves as bait that another might go free. And the enemy's emissary came forth to meet them, a foul and mocking herald, and sought to break their hearts by showing them tokens that he claimed were taken from a slain spy, tokens that the white wizard recognized with a pang as belonging to the ring-bearer's faithful companion. And the herald taunted them that their errand had failed and their spy was taken, and there was no hope left. But the white wizard, though grieved, did not believe the worst, and would not yield, and the host of the west, though they believed now that the ring-bearer might be lost and their own deaths certain and their cause hopeless, did not break and did not flee, but stood firm at the black gate and made ready for a last desperate stand, choosing to die unconquered rather than to live as slaves. And that very steadfastness, that refusal to despair, even when all hope seemed gone, was itself the truest courage of all, and the great host of the enemy poured out from the black gate and fell upon them, and the last battle was joined. And while the small host of the west fought their hopeless battle at the black gate, drawing the whole watchfulness of the enemy outward upon themselves, the thing they had hoped for and could not have foreseen came to pass within. For the ring-bearer was not taken after all, and his faithful companion was not slain, and the two of them, against all hope, had crept on through the black land unnoticed, while the enemy's eye was turned outward to his gate, and had come at the very last, spent and ruined, and at the very end of their strength, to the fire of the mountain where alone the master ring could be unmade. And there, at the very brink, a strange and terrible thing came to pass, for the ring-bearer, at the last and uttermost moment, worn down by the long carrying of so dreadful a burden, found that he could not after all let the ring go, but claimed it for his own, overcome at the last by its terrible power. And it might all have ended there in ruin, but for a strange working of fate, or of something deeper and kindlier than fate, for the wretched, slinking creature that had owned the ring before, that the wizard had once shown such grave and seemingly foolish pity, had followed the ring-bearer all the long way to the mountain of fire, and now, in its mad lust for the ring, it fell upon the invisible ring-bearer at the very brink, and seized the ring, and bit it from his hand, and in its wild triumph it lost its footing upon the edge, and fell, ring and all, down into the fire of the mountain. And so the master ring was unmade at last, not by any plan or any strength, but by an act of pity long before, the pity of the wizard who had spared the wretched creature when others would have slain it, the pity that the wizard had learned so long ago in the house of mourning, reaching forward across all the years to save the world in its uttermost hour. And with the unmaking of the ring, the enemy was undone. His great dark tower trembled and fell. His vast host was struck with sudden terror and broke and fled. His dread wraith-servants withered away into nothing, and the enemy himself, who had poured so much of his being into the ring, was unmade with it, dwindling away at last into a mere impotent malice, a shadow upon the wind, powerless ever again to take shape or to threaten the world. His long evil ended forever, and the small host at the black gate who had stood ready to die saw the darkness break, and the towers fall, and the enemy pass away, and knew that against all hope the impossible errand had succeeded, that the small ring-bearer had done what no power of the great could have done, and that the long shadow was lifted at last from the world. And the white wizard, who alone among all the wise had set his hope upon the courage of the small, who had spared the wretched creature out of pity, who had carried the secret fire of hope through all the long, dark ages, stood there at the black gate in the breaking light, and knew that his long, long errand was accomplished at last, the errand he had taken up so reluctantly, and in such fear so very long ago, upon a far grey shore. And there was no rest for the white wizard even in that hour of victory, for his thought turned at once, as it always turned, to the small and the imperilled, to the two small hobbits who had wrought the deliverance of the world, and who lay now, spent and unconscious and in deadly peril, upon the slopes of the erupting mountain of fire, with the molten ruin of the enemy's land breaking and burning all about them. And so the white wizard called once more upon his old friend, the chief of the eagles, and the great eagle came, and others with him, sweeping down out of the clearing sky upon their broad and golden wings, and the white wizard rode upon the eagle through the smoke and the ash and the falling fire, searching the burning slopes for the two small fallen figures, until at last they were found lying close together upon a little island of rock amid the rising flood of fire, faithful even at the last and the worst. And the eagles snatched them up gently from the very jaws of the ruin, and bore them away into the clean, cool air and the open sky, away from the breaking land and out towards safety. And the joy that filled the white wizard's ancient heart in that moment, when the two small ring-bearers were found alive and snatched from the fire, was as bright and as warm as the first light of dawn breaking over the world after the longest night, a joy beyond all the telling of it, for the world was saved, and the small folk lived, and the long darkness was ended, and the morning had come at last. And the two small hobbits were borne to safety, and laid in soft beds, in a fair green place, and tended and healed, and at the last they woke, slowly, out of the deep healing sleep, into which they had fallen, and opened their eyes upon the green leaves and the golden light of a world made new. And there beside them, the first thing they saw upon waking was the white wizard himself, alive and shining and full of laughter and of joy, watching over them as he had watched over so many, and the small hobbits who had thought their friend lost forever in the dark beneath the mountains so very long ago, and who had given all their strength to a hopeless errand and never expected to wake at all, found themselves alive and safe and whole in a world delivered, with their old friend laughing at their bedside. And it was a waking like a passing from a long dark dream into a bright and unlooked-for morning. Hold that waking gently in your own drifting mind, dear listener, for it is among the most healing images in all this long tale, the slow waking from darkness into golden light, the green leaves stirring softly overhead, the dear familiar face watching over you with joy, the discovery that the long ordeal is over and that you are safe at last and that the morning has truly come. Let that be your own waking in its season after your own long night. And after the great victory and the crowning of the long-hidden king, and the slow healing and rejoicing of the freed peoples of the world, and the long happy weeks of celebration and reunion, there came at last the time of partings, as there always must, and the white wizard journeyed homeward with the small hobbits of the green country, the four of them who had set out so long ago and come now safely back, traveling slowly and pleasantly back across the lands they had crossed in such fear and haste before, lands now lifting out of the long shadow into peace, until they came back at last to the borders of the little green country from which it had all begun. And there, near those borders, the white wizard parted from the hobbits for a while, and turned aside to spend a long quiet season in the company of a strange and merry and very ancient being who dwelt in a small green land of his own, an old spirit of the deep earth and the running water, the eldest and most carefree of all the dwellers in those lands, who had taken no part in any of the great wars and griefs of the age, but had gone on singing and laughing in his own small green country through all the ages of the world, untouched and untroubled, master of his own small domain and servant of none. And the white wizard tarried long with this merry ancient being, and what the two of them spoke of in that long quiet season, two of the eldest spirits in all the world sitting together at last with all their great labours behind them, no tale records, and it remains a mystery folded away in the soft green silence. But we may imagine, if we like, that after so much war and grief and weariness, the white wizard found in that merry old company a deep and a healing peace, a long quiet rest in the sunlit green at the ending of all his cares. And when at last the white wizard came forth from that long quiet season, it was for one final journey, the last and the gentlest of all his long wanderings in the mortal lands, for his errand was accomplished now, fully and finally, the shadow overthrown, the world delivered, the free peoples set free to govern themselves in peace, and there was nothing more for him to do in the mortal lands, and the time had come for him to lay down his long labour at last, and to go home. And so he came once more to the misty haven by the sea, where he had first landed so very long before, the haven of the long stone quays, and the tall masts, and the soft crying of the gulls, and there a fair white ship lay waiting at the quay, a ship bound out over the sea and away from the mortal lands, back to the blessed and undying country from which the white wizard had set sail so long ago in fear and reluctance, and he came down to that ship to take his passage home at last. And he did not go alone, for there came with him to the grey haven the old hobbit who had found the ring so long ago, and the young hobbit who had borne it to the fire, both of them ring-bearers, both of them wounded in spirit by the long carrying of that terrible thing, both of them granted by a special grace to pass over the sea with the wizard and the fair folk, to find healing and rest in the undying lands that no other of their kind had ever been permitted to see. And there came too the Lord of the Hidden Valley and the Lady of the Golden Wood, the keepers of the other two unsullied rings, for their long age in the mortal lands was likewise ending, and the time of their kindred was passing, and they too were going home over the sea into the west. And so they came down to the white ship in the grey light by the murmuring sea, and the ring-bearers said their last farewells to the friends who would remain behind, the partings that are the bittersweet price of every ending. And then they went up the gangway onto the white ship, and the white wizard with them, and the ship was loosed from the quay, and the white sails were spread, and the ship drew slowly out from the misty haven and onto the wide grey water, and turned its prow toward the west, and went on and on, out over the great sea, until it dwindled to a small white speck upon the far horizon, and then was gone, vanished at last over the rim of the world, sailing on into the soft light of the undying west, beyond all the maps and all the memory of the mortal lands. And as the white ship passed away over the sea and out of the world, the one who had been the grey pilgrim and the white rider, who had worn so long the seeming of an old man, and laboured so long and so faithfully in fear and in patience and in hope, laid aside at the last that worn and weary seeming, and became again, in passing out of the mortal lands, the ancient and deathless spirit that he had always been beneath it all, the gentle spirit named Olórin, who had learned his first lessons so very long ago in the gardens of dreams and the house of mourning, before ever the world was old, before ever there was a shadow to fight, or a hobbit to befriend, or a long road to wander. And so his long tale comes round at last to its quiet and gentle close, the tale of the deathless spirit who chose, for love, to go small and weary and unrecognized among the short-lived peoples of the world, to bear their burdens and to share their fears and to kindle in their hearts the small fire of hope, and who, when his long labor was done, sailed quietly home over the sea, leaving behind him a world made free, and asking, as he had always asked, nothing at all in return. And before we let the tale draw to its close, let us linger a little longer, gently, in the long, quiet middle of it all, in the centuries of patient wandering that lay between the great and dreadful deeds. For it is in those quiet years, far more than in the battles, that the true heart of the grey pilgrim is to be found. Imagine yourself, then, walking beside him for a while, upon some ordinary road, in some ordinary year, long before the great war broke upon the world, when the shadow was still only a far cold whisper, and the days were long and green and peaceable. Imagine the soft white dust of the road beneath your feet, and the low afternoon sun warm upon your shoulders, and the smell of crushed grass and wild thyme rising from the verges, and the slow, unhurried, companionable tread of the old grey wanderer at your side, leaning upon his worn staff, in no haste at all to be anywhere, content simply to walk and to watch the long hills unrolling ahead, and to talk of small things or of nothing at all. There is no errand pressing upon you in this imagining, and no danger near, only the long, sweet idleness of a fine day upon an open road in the company of a kind old friend, and the gentle knowledge that the evening, when it comes, will bring a warm hearth and a good supper and a soft bed at the end of it. For that, in truth, was how the grey pilgrim spent the greater part of his long years in the mortal lands, not in great deeds at all, but simply in walking and watching and being present, in turning up unlooked for at some lonely farmstead on a winter's evening and sitting late by the fire with the family, telling tales to the children until their eyes grew heavy, mending some small quarrel with a quiet word, leaving behind him in the morning, when he had gone on his way, a household somehow warmer and braver and more hopeful than he had found it, though they could never quite have said why. He was a giver of small comforts and small courages, scattered freely across the long years like seeds cast upon the wind, most of them never seen to grow, and he asked no thanks for any of it, and kept no count, and went on, from door to door and road to road, through the slow turning of the seasons and the slow turning of the years, the gentlest and the most patient of all wanderers, at home everywhere and nowhere, beloved wherever he was known. And he loved the world, that grey wanderer, loved it with a deep and a tender love, not as a great lord loves his realm from above and at a distance, but as a traveller loves the road, close up and in all its small particular beauties, the first green haze of spring upon the bare brown woods, the smell of wood smoke on a cold clear evening, the sound of a river running over stones in the dark, the warmth of a low sun on an old stone wall, the laughter of children, the bread and the salt of a poor man's table freely shared. He took such joy in these small things, this ancient spirit who had seen the making of the very mountains, this deathless being who had known the world when it was young, took as much joy in a single well-made firework bursting soft and silver over a green hill, or in a good pipe of leaf by a warm fire on a winter's night, as in any of the great and glorious works of the powers, and perhaps more, for he had learned in his long patience the deep secret that the small and the passing things are not less precious than the great and the enduring ones, but more, precisely because they pass, precisely because they are small, precisely because they must be loved now, in this one fleeting moment before they slip away. And there is a kind of peace in that, is there not? A deep, slow peace worth carrying down with you towards sleep. The peace of learning to love the small, near things of an ordinary day, the warmth and the bread and the firelight and the company, and to let the great far things take care of themselves. So let your own thoughts grow as slow and as easy now as the tread of that old wanderer upon his endless road, and let the cares of your own day, the great ones and the small ones alike, loosen their grip and fall softly away behind you, as the miles of the road fall away behind a patient traveler who knows that he will reach his rest in the end, and is in no hurry at all to get there, and is content for now simply to walk in the warm sun and to watch the long hills go by. The road is gentle, the evening is coming, the warm hearth and the soft bed are waiting at the end of it, as they always are, and there is nothing for you to do, here in the long, sweet idleness of this drowsy hour, but to walk a little while longer beside the kind old wanderer, and then, when you are ready, to lie down and rest. And now, as our long journey through this gentle tale draws near to its ending, let us turn our slow and drowsy thoughts away from the deeds and the dates and the names, and rest them instead for a little while upon the deeper and softer question of why such a tale should comfort us so, here in the warm dark at the close of the day, and what quiet thing it has to whisper to us as we drift down towards sleep. For when all the battles and the journeys and the perils have been told and are over, what stays with us, what lingers, is not the clash of arms nor the fall of towers, but something gentler and more enduring, the figure of a wise old wanderer who carried a small hidden fire of hope through all the long darkness of the world, and who spent that fire freely upon every cold and frightened heart he met, and who asked for nothing, and who endured. For consider, as you lie there in the soft and gathering quiet, what it was that this gentle spirit truly was. Beneath all his many names and all his many seemings, he was not the mightiest of the powers of the world, nor the strongest, nor the most dreadful in battle. He was the wisest, perhaps, but more than wise, he was the most patient and the most pitying and the most steadfast in hope, and it was these gentle virtues, and not any great might, that in the end saved the whole world from the shadow. For it was his pity, the pity he had learned so long ago in the house of mourning, the pity that stayed his hand from slaying a wretched and miserable creature, when slaying would have seemed so much the wiser course, that reached forward across all the long years and unmade the ring at the last when all the strength of the great had failed. And it was his patience, the long, slow, enduring patience that does not break even through the grinding of whole ages, that kept him faithful to his thankless errand through century upon century of small, unnoticed labors, through betrayal and imprisonment, and even through death itself in the dark beneath the mountains. And it was his hope, the small hidden fire that he carried always within him and shared always freely, that kindled courage in 1,000 failing hearts, and that set its trust, against all the scorn of the worldly wise, upon the deep and stubborn courage of the small and the overlooked, the courage of the little folk that the whole great world had thought too small to matter, and that proved in the end to be the very thing on which the whole great world depended. And is that not a deep and a healing thing to carry with you down into your dreams, the truth that this old tale holds out so gently to us all, that it is not the loud and the mighty and the proud who save the world in the end, but the patient and the pitying and the faithful and the small, that the quiet kindness, done long ago and forgotten, may reach forward across all the years to work a deliverance no force could ever have wrought, that hope kept burning low through the longest night is never truly wasted, and that the light, however deep it sinks into the dark, however far it falls, is never finally lost but only hidden for a while, and rises again at the last, brighter than before, exactly when it is needed most. The grey pilgrim fell into the deepest dark of all, into death itself in the roots of the world, and came back greater, robed in white, like the dawn after the longest night, and that, in the end, is the deepest comfort of his whole long tale, that falling is not the end, that the dark is not the end, that even out of the very deepest dark the light comes round again. So as you lie there now, warm and safe, and growing heavy with sleep, let the tale of the gentle wandering spirit settle over you like a soft and well-worn blanket, and let it whisper to you its quiet promise, that there is, somewhere in the deep working of things, a patience that does not give up, and a pity that does not run dry, and a hope that does not finally fail, and that the small kindnesses you yourself have done, and the small courages you yourself have shown, the quiet, enduring strength with which you yourself carry your own burdens through your own long days, are never as small or as unseen or as wasted as they may sometimes feel, but are part, in some deep and unguessable way, of that same great and gentle working by which the light, in the end, outlasts the dark. Let that be enough. Let that be the soft last thought of your waking mind, and let it carry you gently down. For the night is deep now, and the long tale is told, and there is nothing left for you to do but rest. The grey ship has passed away over the sea into the soft light of the west, and the world it left behind is at peace, and the stars are coming out one by one, in the great quiet sky above the sleeping lands, the same patient stars that an ancient queen kindled long ago in the deeps of the dark for the waking of the first peoples, shining down now upon you as gently as they have shone upon every weary traveller who ever lay down to rest beneath them. Let your breathing be slow and easy now, slow as the long, slow breathing of the sea, and let the last small cares of the day loosen and fall away from you like the wake of a ship fading into still water. There is nothing to fear in the dark, dear listener, for the dark is only the soft country of rest, and the morning is only hidden, never lost, and it will come again as it always comes, in its own good time, gently with the dawn. Drift now, easily, down past the green hills and the singing rivers and the tall, quiet trees of that old, old world, down past the wandering grey pilgrim with his worn staff and his broad hat and his small hidden fire of hope, down into the warm and shoreless country of sleep where no shadow can follow and no road need be walked, where you may lay down every burden and rest and rest and rest. Good night, dear friend. May the gentle stars keep their watch over you, and may your dreams be filled with wonder and with light, and may you wake gently, in your own good time, into a bright and peaceful morning. Sleep now, sleep and be at peace.